Добрый день, меня слышно? Добрый день, коллеги, слышно меня?
Мы с вами рядышком опять.
Как всегда.
Чё, рядом с Гапановичем.
Да, как всегда, да.
Вам нужен стикер, да? Тут кликер.
Нет.
А мне кликер потребуется. Можно?
Олег Александрович, у нас какой регламент? 15 минут?
15 минут потолок.
Я так понимаю, что все, наверное, да?
Да?
Давайте начнем. Раз. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги,
Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues.
дорогие друзья.
Good afternoon, dear
Мы
friends.
продолжаем второй день
We continue
российской недели стандартизации.
the second day of the
Сегодня
Russian
дискуссия
week for
посвящена
standardization, and
вопросам
our session is dedicated to the issues of standardization,
стандарты как инструменты цифрового
and
регулирования.
first and foremost to standards
Меня
as
зовут Петухов Анатолий
digital
Александрович, я
transformation
заместитель
tools. My
генерального
name is
директора
Oleg
Российского института
Petukhov.
стандартизации.
I'm
И
deputy
сегодня
director
выступать
at
буду
Russian
на этой сессии.
Institute of Standardization, and I will be
Говоря
moderating the
о
session.
стандартизации,
When we talk about
точнее, о цифровой
standardization,
трансформации
or more precisely
стандартизации,
about digital transformation of
необходимо
standardization,
отметить, что
we
она
need
идет
to
по
point out
нескольким направлениям.
that it has several
Основные
directions,
из них
and the main
это
direction
цифровизация таких
is
процессов,
connected
как
with
разработка
digitalization
стандартов,
of such processes
распространение
as
стандартов,
standards
применение
development,
стандартов.
their
Кроме
distribution,
этого, огромный
proliferation, and
пласт работы лежит
application,
в
plus
плоскости
a
перевода
huge scope of
стандартов
work
в
is connected
машиночитаемые и машинопонимаемые
with
форматы.
transformation of
Также
standards
идет
to
активная работа
formats
по
applicable for machine learning. We
разработке
also
и
devise
перспективному применению смарт-стандартов
smart standards
и
for
работа,
their
направленная на
prospective application and work
взаимодействие
aimed at
с
interaction
зарубежными
with
организациями по
foreign
стандартизации,
organizations
в
for
управлении,
standardization, also
цифровизации, стандартизации.
within the framework of
Сегодня у нас
standardization and
6
digitalization.
выступлений,
Today we have
5
6
выступлений вживую, одно
presentations,
будет
5 live
ВКС.
presentation and 1
Регламент
remote
каждого выступления в
presentation,
пределах 10-15 минут.
10-15
Если
minutes
будет
for
возможность,
each
то мы ответим на
presentation, and
вопросы.
if there is an opportunity, we will
Поэтому
ask the
большая просьба
questions.
придерживаться
So I
регламента,
kindly
потому
ask
что мы
you to
ограничены
stick
по времени
to the
полутора
time
часа.
limit because
И
we have only
начнем
90 minutes for our session,
Начнем
and
нашу сессию с
our
выступления
session
Соломатова Владимира
will be
Юрьевича,
opened by the presentation of
доктора
Vladimir Solomatov,
экономических наук, профессора,
Doctor of Economy,
генерального
Professor,
директора
Director General
общества
of
международная торговля и интеграция. И его
International
доклад будет
Trade and Integration Joint Stock
звучать
Company,
следующим образом.
and his presentation
Цифровое
is
техническое
called
регулирование,
Digital
каким оно
Technical
будет.
Regulation.
Владимир Юрьевич,
How
прошу.
will it look like? So, Mr. Solomatov, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Petukhov, and thank you very much for your attention, esteemed colleagues. And I would like to say that in 2013, I was privileged to drive a car for the first time, the car which resembled all other vehicles, but it was a new one and I wanted to test it. And it was a Tesla car, and I drove it for several kilometers, and I understood that it's not just a new car, it's a new phenomenon, an innovation and something beyond all the things we are used to. And of course, when I need to say that the process, which has quite a circular character in our life is quite simple, because there is a request of a market, and this request is elaborated by those who deal with standardization and requirements for the goods, and after that it becomes a prerequisite for the establishment of updated and modernized goods. But still, there is a class of requirements which is sometimes beyond the requirements we are used to, because these are innovative requirements and they are not all the time covered by the standards or pre-standards, by the lead to new kinds of goods and their emergence, and to the fact that they emerge quite frequently, and that's an amazing factor to emphasize. What happened to me in 2013 led to the fact that I started gathering different sources of information, and I remembered that churches were used in Russia to pass information during the era before Peter the Great. The bells ringing were used to pass the information across the European territory of the country, but after that new communication channels emerged. But this, which can be called innovative from the standpoint of their capacity, are connected with internet technologies, because you need not only to pass the information but also to verify it, because we need to pass trusted sources of information, so only the comprehensive character of transformation, transfer and verification can yield positive results. And we create new products for the development of standards, for the development of new requirements, and here we need to understand how it will look like. In February we held ISO session, and we predefined the strategy of the development of this organization and of standardization in general till 2030, and there was a clear-cut definition coined that data transfer will be performed in the mode machine-to-machine, and we need to do our best to make it reality. And there is a question who will be in charge of decision-making. The answer is evident: a human being based on information present, but standards of the fourth level or of the fifth level also imply part of the decisions made by a machine. And these are some things which source from the strategy, ISO strategy to 2030. Main uses of documents for technical regulation and standardization are machines and information systems, and we need to form our standards the way that they comply with such an opportunity. Communication channels are connected with machine-to-machine interfaces with digital environment of an enterprise, and the database and a system which contains all the data which are needed, which is needed. And another point, we are used to the fact that machines do understand the standards is in XML format or in text formats, in PDF formats, and a lot of people think that it is something we need, but basically we need standards which can be perceived and processed by machines, and I will dwell upon that a bit later. And yesterday, Project Committee 711, we clarified and discussed all the standards which had been endorsed by ISO meeting, where Mr. Shalai is also taking part in terms of the elaboration and confirmation of the standards. And one of the main directions connected with digital transformation and technical regulation as the system which is controlling not only mandatory requirements but also the requirements for the quality of goods. That's the provision of control for interaction with the users, also data control management within the framework of technical regulation. And last point, which is also important, the elaboration of digital means of development of standards. Because if you have a look at modern standards, you will understand that to make a digital standard, you need to divide text into separate blocks, to define data and other information elements. And it's clear that when we devise standards for digital transformation, we need to have digital environment which will enable us, from the standpoint of data input, for a machine be able to understand what's going on. But there are a lot of difficulties, and they act as hindrances from the standpoint of implementation of this goal, and they are demonstrated on the slide. I beg your pardon, I don't see very well, so that's why I'm using my tablet. So what Oleg has mentioned yesterday, we need standards for the elaboration of our digital standards regulations. We need to have clear-cut understanding what we want to achieve, and what Mr. Petukhov has said is very important, because we need to consolidate this approach. Second point is adaptation of goods for the tasks of goods classifiers, because we can't perceive standards without a clear-cut understanding of standards which are adapted to the goals and strategies of today. We need to have a system which is to perceive all the goods which are embraced. Besides, we also need to form a repository of requirements or a classifier of requirements for the goods, because the second element in this overall system is the requirement to the characteristics of goods. They need to be verified, and via them we need to get access to information which have mandatory requirements for the goods. We also need to understand that today we have a lot of databases, but we don't have any unified database from the standpoint of standards regulation. We have information integrated system of EAS, and it has its own information system in the field of industry. Russian accreditation institution also has its own database. But we need to create a unified database which will be available for everyone. And of course, we need to change legislation, norms and standards, and establish mutual relations from the standpoint of requirements for the goods and test methods and sampling. And at the bottom of the slide, you see that thus we will be able to shift to a unified system, unanimous system, which would be automated with assessment of conformity of goods to the requirements confirmed or established. And it brings us back to the classification which was endorsed in February 2021 by ISO. And if we analyze all the documents, then we do not go beyond the second level.
например, компания Codex,
A company,
очевидно,
for
уже
instance, a
работает,
Codex
решая
company,
локальные задачи на
is
третьем,
operating,
ну, где-то
resolving
четвертом
its
уровне,
goals
но
on the
для
third or
нас,
on the
для
fourth level.
цифрового
But for us,
технического
as for
регулирования
digital
и в целом для
technical regulator
стандартизации
and
нужны
standardization
унифицированные
on the whole,
общие
we need to have
подходы,
standardized,
которые могут
generalized
применяться разными
approaches which
отраслями,
can be
разными
applied by different
организациями.
industries,
И
companies,
более того,
and
эти подходы
enterprises,
должны
and moreover, those
реализовывать нам
approaches
возможности
need
передачи
to
информации
implement our
всем неограниченному
opportunities
кругу
for
пользователей, потому что для
data
системы
transfer
технического регулирования
with
это
unlimited
является
opportunities,
тем
because that's
условием,
also
которое
a
заложено в
prerequisite
соглашении
which
о
is
создании
embedded in
Союза.
the
Ну
agreement
и
on the
еще
creation,
раз
on
я
the
хочу
establishment
сказать,
of a
что
union. And I
невозможно
also need to say that it's
провести цифровую
impossible to have
трансформацию
digital
системы технического
transformation
регулирования
of the
таможенного
system
союза
of
или
technical
Евразийского
regulation
союза
of the customs
без
union or
создания
Eurasian
цифровых
union
средств
without
разработки
establishment of
технических
digital
регламентов,
tools of technical
стандартов.
regulations,
И вот
elaboration,
тут как
standards,
бы возникает
elaboration.
такой
And here
философский
we
вопрос.
have quite a philosophical
Скажите,
issue
что
emerging.
вот есть сотни стандартов,
What is
тысячи
the essence?
стандартов, нам
What
нужно
is
засучить рукава и всех
100
переводить в новую
standards
цифровую
about?
форму,
What is
там, допустим,
1000
третьего
standards
уровня, я
about? Do
скажу
we need
потом,
to transfer
почему
them to
третьего
the
уровня, хотя
digital
здесь
form
уже
of the third
написано.
level, for instance, of the
Я
third
думаю,
level?
что
And I
нет.
will tell you
Нужно
why
брать наиболее важные
afterwards. I
стандарты,
think
а
now we
дальше
need to
пользоваться законом о
take the most
стандартизации в
significant
России.
ones,
Ну и в
and after
целом,
that
во
use
всем,
our
что каждые
standardization
5 лет стандарты
legislation,
должны
the Russian one,
пересматриваться.
and
И по мере
also
пересмотра
standards applied by
стандартов
ISO,
уже
and
новые
after
версии
that
стандартов, и
endorse
новые
it and
стандарты
review
нужно
them in the
сразу
run of several years,
разрабатывать в
and
цифровой среде разработки
all
стандартов.
other standards are to be
Следующий слайд
elaborated
показывает о том,
within the
что вот
framework
все
of
наши
the
дискуссии,
digital
которые
environment
шли
of
последние 2
standardization.
года, осознание проблемы закончились тем, что Евразийская экономическая
The
комиссия
Eurasian Economic
приняла решение о
Commission
развертывании
has made a decision
проекта,
on
который называется «Цифровое техническое
the
регулирование».
elaboration of the
Наша
project, which is
компания
called Digital
выступила
Technical
инициатором этого
Regulation, and
проекта
our
и входит
company
сейчас в
initiated this
международный
project
консорциум.
and is a part
Поэтому
of an international consortium.
представляя здесь всю эту
That's why
информацию,
we
хотим иметь очень широкую
represent this
кооперацию,
information
участие
today, and we would
Росстандарта,
like to have wide
Российского
cooperation
института стандартизации,
represented by Russian
других
Standardization
организаций, для того,
Institute
чтобы нам
and
эту
other
проблему,
high-profile
эту задачу
organizations
решить.
to resolve this
Здесь
goal.
предложен очень
And
простой слайд.
That's quite
Это
a
то, что
simple
делается в
slide.
техническом
That's what is
регулировании.
done from
Каждому
the standpoint
виду
of technical
продукции
regulation.
соответствует
Each
несколько технических регламентов, где установлены обязательные
group of
требования.
goods complies with a set of requirements, number of standards, which are in the list number 1, and the list number 2, which embraces test methods and sampling methods. After that, we can clearly define what are the kinds of equipment which are needed for tests. And after that, we have a declaration or a certificate which enables goods production and their introduction to the market. So everything represented here and what is done by our certification authorities is to be performed automatically. And that's a clear task. All these interactions, which are said here, are to be resolved by a machine in interaction with another machine of a user. That's what we need to start doing and to start resolving. And the next slide, we made it as simple as possible on purpose, because to a certain extent that's a scheme of standards of the third level. And so what do we see here? We have an identified product, and it has its clear niche in a classifier of goods, and these goods have certain characteristics and traits, and the requirements are also set for it, and we need to have clear-cut positions from a classifier which are the proof of the fact that these requirements to these goods are applied in reality, and via those requirements we will come to specific indicators and data which are to be implemented. Part of them are mandatory, part of them are not, and it is also to be specified. So we are shifting to the necessity of such a distinction between standards for us to be able to embrace a huge scope of information about those requirements, and if needed, a machine is to be able to unite them all, to gather them, and to pass them to a digital environment of an enterprise which is elaborating a new kind of goods, for instance. And that brings me to the first slide. So these are the simple things introduced here on the schemes, but to do that, we need to have a huge scope of work performed. And together with Standard & Form, Russian Institute for Standardization, we are working to be able to introduce an XML distinction which will be in compliance with the third level of standards according to ISO classification. And these are the standards which can be perceived as those which are comprehensible for a machine. A machine can request requirements for the goods, and these standards will reveal all the data and pass them to the enterprise's environment. That's the third level. That's the level we are to achieve, and that's the level of standards we need for digital transformation of technical regulation. My next slide is demonstrating the fact that everything done manually, that a lot of services are performed manually in spite of the digital environment we have. And this year we have established our master studies, and the overall direction is connected with transfer of international trade to digital environment, and students of this master studies program are dealing with elaboration of standards for different goods, agricultural goods, oil, crops, railway, spare parts, to understand how it is to work, how this environment is to look like, to enable us to create level 3 standards according to ISO standard classification. And you see, we have speakers, we have people who work in different spheres and represent different enterprises, but they all deal with standardization in different fields. At the same time, we have one thing in common. We are connected with the goods we produce, and if all our digital spheres could be accumulated, then we will have a huge ecosystem of digital technical regulation, international trade, technical knowledge. So digital technical regulation is in the center, and we see the national component being established, and it has 3 services involved. One service for the definition of goods, which can have mandatory requirements. The second component is connected digital environment for documents elaboration in the field of standardization for the goal of establishment of mandatory requirements. The third service is connected with issuing and execution of those mandatory requirements at the request of a user. And afterwards, all those things, state information systems as well as private ones, and we do use this elaborate system to get information, and we all can unite, involving Russian Institute for Standardization, for international databases, and we will be able to get in the digital form in a speedy manner the data we need for verification and for the updating without waiting, like I did in 2013 when I came and my employees started to do the research who Elon Musk is and what projects he has. It can be done in 1 second. It can be done promptly to get a huge scope of verified information to move forward. And basically, that's the scheme I wanted to introduce. It's quite simple, machine to machine, but we have quite a serious thing at stake, because Russian economy, will it have significant role in the world economic system or not? I think to a large extent it depends on the people who are sitting here right now, and for those people who are sitting in the hall, it's very important to understand whether we will be able to comply with the requirements of the time of real transfer to digital information, for it to operate for the sake of our countries and our companies. I hope we will succeed. everything will work, and then we'll participate in international trade, and our economy shall flourish. In the ending, this is the logo of our company and our slogan. I believe it's a very noble one. Thanks for the attention. Thank you, Vladimir, for a very interesting and informative presentation. And you didn't mention that since the year 19, you're working in the field quite actively. Your company is an ideologist of this digital platform of the technical regulation. And so your input is the biggest. I'm a very happy person, in fact, because we're enthusiastic about this idea, and not only us, also Standard Info, Rosstandart, the Code, the Russian Railroads, and Eurasian Commission. Only together we'll be able to resolve this task. It's a very difficult one. It'll involve hundreds of people and organizations to be able to carry out this task, but I'm sure we'll cope. Yes, if Alexander says yes, definitely we'll cope. Yes, if we unite, definitely we'll cope. Next presentation shall be by Valentina Gopanovic, the president of NGO, Railroad Equipment Producers. He'll tell on the system of requirements to railroad products as a part of the system of management for quality and safety. Thank you, Oleg. I will talk not about railroad transport only, or all of it, just a small segment of the railroad products, because otherwise the topic is too big. The Russian companies produce annually, like last year, we produced some produce for the sum of 870 billion rubles. Lastochka trains, locomotives, railroad cars, equipment, repair of rolling stock. Also, we are buying rails and other metal products, nearly 1 trillion rubles. And these are various products that require certain norms, technological norms. That's the introduction information. For all this to work well, 2 committees were formed. One is called the Committee number 45, and the Russian National Committee, and MTK 524, that's the Interdepartmental and International Committee. We are having a non-commercial partnership or non-governmental partnership with the producers of railroad equipment. Our main objectives mid-term, and this was mentioned by Oleg, we want to create an ecosystem for the document turnover. That's one of the key objectives we're working at present. We know the Codex company headed by Sergei, and this was good for our development. We have already created, and before the end of the year, the electronic database shall be finished of the parts of the railroad cars. That's a very sophisticated topic. If you know about the rolling stock, you are familiar with it. So be the electronic database, including everything that is being produced and installed on the railroad cars, cargo cars or gondolas. We have 1.2 million of those in Russia only. So we've created that electronic database, and it works. We've decided to create a digital twin of a railroad car, full range digital twin, and also we should create conditions for import substitutions according to the order of Russian government number 719 on import substitution. We need to deal with that, and we need to create some norms. There are some problems in that area. I'll mention them later. Well-known slide, frequently presented by Anton as well. We've
started our work with that. Thanks to our cooperation with Codex company, we 100% of standards we're using were transferred into an XML format, thanks to the Codex company. I'm underlining that.
Дальше, пожалуйста. Что из себя представляет конструкция цифровой экосистемы?
What's the structure of the digital ecosystem? Technical regulations of the Customs Union are here. There are 3 of those. They're digitalized. The federal laws were digitalized. The most important ones on the railroad transport. We had to digitalize the statutes of the railroad transport of Russia. Some sub-laws were digitalized. They are important for the product's life cycle. Some of the sub-laws of the Ministry of Transport of Russia, and we did complete digitalization of all the national and subnational standards. Next come the problem issues. They need to be resolved to make the system working well. That machine-machine documentation requires the interfaces on both sides. If you don't digitalize the design documentation, at least the 3 on a minimum level, nothing will work. It's going to be useless otherwise. I do hope we'll witness the concept of digital transformation. In no presentations, and even in your article that I've read attentively in the last journal, Standards and Quality, you kind of evaded that topic. You can't talk about the life cycle of products management. It's there. I read attentively. Okay, I'll double check. Let us not dispute now. But I believe this topic requires special attention. I quite agree. Otherwise, nothing will work. There'll be the roof, but no foundation. Important point yesterday at the government meeting in the Department of Industry, we raised this issue. All my colleagues, the reps of other associations, quite agree that it's necessary to actualize code of GDP2 and develop codes. Example, railroad wheel. Annually, metal producing companies produce on average 1.4 million of rail car wheels. They're made using 32 drawings. There are wheels for high-speed trains. We keep traveling on subson trains, speed trains, and next to it there's cargo car with the same kind of wheel, which is in the same design or standard, whether it's a train with the speed of 250 kilometers per hour, or if it's a train for cargo that moves slowly, the wheel is exactly similar. I believe that's wrong. So I believe the UKPD2 codes should be made more orderly. There are same drawbacks in that area. Industrial companies are ready to actively participate in this work, so do the research institutes in the field. We need not just a discussion, but to really solve the issue. Well, that's a brief explanation of technical regulations requirements that are transformed via the coding, the standards requirements, and the requirements to the products. And we observe the subdivision of the requirements necessary for compliance assessment. That's mainly regarding documentation, and the requirements that we need in future at production of products. When we talk about automated complexes, machines, programmed machines, etc. So that finally we do have digitalized requirements digitalized requirements and design documentation, and the software and the interfaces, so that at the measurement complexes, everything is within a uniform digital space. Then we shall obtain a real effect. Because if we don't provide the wording of our objectives, we won't be able to carry out what is necessary to be done. Business will tell you, I'm not interested in abstract slogans. Of course, the security and safety issues are important for the government. But what are the effects for the business that they shall be ready to finance? That's of importance. We need to create the digital ecosystem that will have a massive effect. That's not only in the field of accreditation and certification of products, just the availability of electronic document turnover shall be of useful. Earlier, at Bezhinsk in Bryansk, a steel plant, they make details for the cargo railway cars. Then they are sent to Tikhvin together with paper documents. There, the technical department may have a day off. Machines are idle, salary is paid, nothing is happening. Then on Monday, people come to work and they start to carry out the paper documentations. Great losses. Nowadays, it takes seconds. Electronic passport, Bezhinsk steel is well known. So within seconds, the railroad people do get the digital copy of the electronic document. I think this is quite an effect. So the system should be developed and business should be made interested in digitalization. Another important thing, I believe, within the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU, we could do that for the beginning. This would be the central accreditation organ. They exist in every country. Next level to the bottom, organs of certification. In Belarus, there are 4 bodies just in railroad transport area. In Kazakhstan, 23 bodies. In Russia, 7 bodies. I'm not criticizing, but in Belarus, they only do the assembling of Stadler trains. That's all. However, they have 4 bodies. Well, testing centers. Kazakhstan, they have 33 testing centers. Russia has 57. Belarus has 12 testing centers for railroad products. If we create a EU ecosystem, we could get that digitalized, and it's possible to do it. Who will do that? I believe there'll be a contest. When we talked with Mr. Dazarenko, he said there's going to be a tender. One of the companies shall win. So that's what we could do initially, to make a common digital space, including the testing centers and certification bodies, and to minimize our efforts. Next slide. That's the way we see the uniform digital space, including Russian accreditation, testing centers, certification centers, and everything related to the chain of the products compliance assessment. And the last thing, and I believe it's correct that the committee number 711 was formed. We should actively participate in its work. But first, we should do the wording of the objective. We should have a concept. We should understand what we're doing and what for we're doing that. Otherwise, digital transformation won't be easy to introduce. Everything has to be explained in detail and in a smart way. And we should make business interested. It shouldn't be implied on business, not to have a negative reaction. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was making marks during your presentation. You mentioned digitalization at enterprises that make railroad products. And you mentioned the uniform digital environment that would include testing, certification, and accreditation. That's the very tool that will provide the high quality of railroad products certification. Thanks a lot once again. If there are any questions, you're most welcome. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself. The speaker is not asking the question into the mic. The interpreter can't hear him yet. We are familiar with the NGO, with this partnership of railroad equipment producers and Samara region, did sign a relevant agreement, and we do have experience in the field. Besides, in Samara region, there's the Innovation Center of Russian railroads operating. And the entrepreneur's business is encountering in this chain the problem of testing. Now the industries are developed very quickly, but the testing periods are required by the railroads, Russian railroad specialized centers. They take a lot of time to test and testing is equipment, and that is killing the startup efforts. Not everyone is ready for this long time lag related to testing. How could we speed up that testing process by the railroads? It's rather a question to the government, because we are business and non-commercial partnership. We are far from that topic. However, your question is quite righteous. And that transformation and digitalization shall speed up the process. Human efforts won't be necessary. You just have a one-stop shop, you make an application, you get the digitalized standards and codes. That's it. So there'll be no humans to delay. The only role of the person shall be to sample the products, get the detail. That's it. When visiting the plant, the rest shall be automated, and so will accreditation. As for the testing centers, since there was a question on the topic, please talk to Mr. Andrei Smykov. In the end of the month, we'll have a big meeting dedicated to the compliance assessment methodology. You're welcome. You may talk to him and discuss those problems you have related to the testing centers. Mr. Guchenko is at the head, Edward Guchenko is at the head of the testing centers. You may talk to him as well. That's a public organization that unites all the centers. Perhaps they are not working efficiently enough. We'll do our best to make them better. We'll do whatever is possible to improve their efficiency. Anyway, yesterday in the government of Russia, we talked about the codes, and that was efficient. They accepted our application, and the department had said that the Vice Prime Minister Borisov shall get to know that a decision is necessary in the field. Let's hope that the decision is coming. Thank you. Now let me give the floor to Sergei Tikhomirov, the General Director of a Codex company. He's also the chair of PTK 711 committee, Smart Standards. Yesterday, a regular meeting took place. The future development was discussed of the smart standards. They considered including 3 topics: the national standardization for the year 21, new national standards, and the plan of events. Sergei will tell us on smart standards of future and smart standardization. He had previously a different name of the same presentation. It used to be called Smart Standards of Future Digitalization, but perhaps after the latest presentation of Dina, they believed it's a real digitalization, and smart standards are just the tool of future digitalization. Thank you, Oleg. Now let me briefly tell what they think around the world about digital standards, machine-readable standards, smart standards, etc. Russia should consider the international experience in the field. Let me reproduce the scheme presented by the previous speakers, that is a classification of machine-readable standards. They underwent the expertise of ISO and international and IEC. That is the fourth level qualification. Fourth level of qualification. The sense of the smart standard is the opportunity to be used or read by a human and by a machine. It's kind of universal. It's both human-friendly and machine-friendly. So the smart standard was first mentioned in this document. It was published, and in Russia, this is explained in the article of Mr. Shalayev, and it's published in the journal Standards and Quality. Now let me show you the order of Rosstandart issued in July on the organization of a design technical committee. It's called Smart Standards. The objective of the technical committee is to develop the first smart standards. The technical committee is based in two companies, the Distinguished Russian Standardization Institute, and the other company is Codex company that I'm the head of. We are planning to develop the first standards, and the Design Technical Committee also wants to unite the experts who would deal with the issue to create a kind of a professional community on the topic.
I would also like to inform you on a unified report by our German colleagues issued in 2021, and it has been published quite recently, and I think that it's a must for Russian experts to get acquainted with this German doctrine, which is called a scenario of digital standardization, and it reflects an outlook for the perspective of 10 years, and I would like to demonstrate a scheme which is quite similar to the previous one, but here we have another level emerging, the fifth one, and the German colleagues forecast an active use of AI in standardization, and artificial intelligence, according to the German colleagues, generalizes a feedback from the Internet of Things, and AI is becoming the subject of standardization. So it is implied that standards will be specified with the help of AI, and they will become more precise thanks to that. We translated this document into Russian, and we forwarded a request to the German organizations with an opportunity to publish it, for a permission to publish it for the Russian community, and we hope if the permission is granted, we will be able to publish it for you to get acquainted with the document. Of course, we need to read this document, to consider it, and to elaborate the Russian outlook, as the Russian Federation has to have its own outlook on standardization in the field of digitalization. So it's quite clear that all the foreign concepts are taken into account, and that is done by Project Technical Committee 711, and it will work in close cooperation with Technical Committee 22, Information Technologies, and Technical Committee 64, Artificial Intelligence. And our goal is not only to elaborate a standard, but also to initiate general professional discussion in the field of smart standards. I would like to express some thoughts I have in terms of smart standards. Unlike foreign colleagues think, and unlike some Russian colleagues think, I'm inclined to say that smart standards can't be regarded as a content alone, and we need to move away from the notion of a file containing this smart standard. Smart standard, as I see it, is to be considered as an object of information systems. First and foremost, it has a complicated digital structure, and here we need to reiterate a term which was voiced during the plenary session. We implied to use the term of a container, data container, which will contain this structure of a smart standard. And why is it so important to talk about information system? Standard, in a semantic sense of the word, is a component of a unified sense system, and information system has to provide for this unified space, semantic space and information space. And any smart standard and its component, such as a request and its spare parts or constituent parts, have to have a unique identification, and only thus we will be able to create and to provide for the intellectual character of the system. And the concept of a single file, I would reiterate, we need to move away from it, and that's only just a single case of deviation from smart standards, as well as smart standards functioniness. And a human being currently and in the future lives surrounded by information systems. On the one hand, Internet of Things, which is becoming smarter and smarter, and on the other hand, we need to have controlled information systems which would provide for the control and management of Internet of Things and compliance with the requirements which are embedded in the standards. I tried to compile my own definition, and it is written on the slide. I won't be reading it out loud, but I would like to say that I think that it is connected with e-document notion, and e-document notion is represented in the legislation, and I'm stating that a standard is an object of a unified information system of standardization and is represented as a container of structured and non-structured data, and it allows to organize services, man-readable and machine-readable services. And data container term also needs to be standardized. IT experts know what it is, but this term is not represented in norms and regulations. We need to coin it. It's clear that digital representation of a smart standard is a comprehensive information object, and the structure of this object implies to be standardized within the framework of the first row of standards. Another important component of a smart standard is connected with norms and regulations. It's the main semantic object and information object at the same time. And of course, a standard needs to imply definition of those requirements and their distinction from the standpoint of semantic objects, and when readable content of this requirement can be connected with parameters, characteristics of an object of standardization of different parameters, and thus shift to the expression of this requirement in a machine understandable or readable language. So the first part is a man-readable one, the first part of the standard, and the second part of the standard is connected with the need to be readable by the information systems. The notion of requirement is regulated as well, and by the standards and by the federal law, and basically a requirement is a brief norm, and in the future a requirement is about intellectual objects which can be readable both by human beings and by machines, and in a number of cases standards will contain a set of different requirements, and I will give you an example. And we need to have a text of a requirement which can be read by a human and transform it into a requirement which can be read by a machine. And how can it be done? There are two approaches to transfer a requirement to a machine readable language, either with the use of algorithms, the way IT experts do, either to elaborate set of tools which enable to code human words into digital elements. I like the second option more, it's simpler. And I think that this coding method will be used in the future. And that's an example which Valentin Gapanovich mentioned. Together we tried to select from the overall norms and operations documents for a railway set of wheels to select requirements and to introduce those requirements to a special system which is called control system, requirement control system, and thus requirement control system has the overall set of requirements which are connected with the very object I mentioned. And an example of a new variant of standards is a system, a requirement control system. It can be either an environment for elaboration and endorsement of these requirements, or an environment which can be used further for design of goods and the production and operations. Requirements control system, which contains a whole set of requirements, is in fact a digital twin of a good from the standpoint of norms and regulations. And I think that on the level of standards of organizations, such kind of standard is very convenient, and in practice it will be applied in the future. A couple of other remarks in terms of semantics of requirements, because it can be connected with the relative behavior of a human being, and in this sense of the word, these requirements will be readable by people, because people are to perceive the requirements in themselves, but the requirements in terms of processes and goods, these requirements will be introduced in formats both applicable for human beings and machines, and these are the two methods I have mentioned, either to use algorithms and algorithmic languages, but in this sense of the word we also need to standardize them, or to use smart services and classifiers and adopted classifications, and this has been mentioned already, and I will say a couple of words as well. In terms of classifiers, I would like to say the following. I don't see my screen now, but I would like to remind you of European experience. In Europe, leading industrial companies united and establish a classifier which is called E-class. This classifier includes the list of goods and standardized traits and characteristics of all the goods. We ought to establish an equivalent to this list. And as you know, major work is conducted in this direction in the field of construction. Classifiers for construction information is being devised, and afterwards it will be used as the coding instrument for different requirements, also requirements which are the part of the project documentation. And I would like to remind you of the fact why smart standards are needed. First, they will enable us to accelerate the elaboration of standards due to the increased efficiency of expert activity. They will allow us to influence the performance from the standpoint of requirements control system, which will accompany the whole life cycle of the goods. And naturally, after we learn to attract AI, we'll be able to get additional efficiency and performance due to the prompt decision-making and search of best possible solutions. And to conclude, in spite of the fact that AI implies to be involved, and it will help people naturally, but I always remember the quotation of one ancient Greek philosopher who said that a human being is the measure of things, and artificial intelligence won't hinder a human being from being the measure for all the things. Thank you very much, Mr. Tikhomirov. We're a bit out of agenda, so I would like to pass the floor to Sergei Volkov and his presentation. Elaboration of ontology for the goals of information modeling, with the participation and support of Rosatom Corporation. So, am I right? Yes. Thank you. I will try to be quite brief. The prerequisites for the elaboration of this system are connected with several reasons. The first one is the need to elaborate a set of information rules for every construction facility. After that, we had to resolve integration tasks of geo-information data, project and corporate data, and Every time we have to integrate, and sometimes if we have an interdisciplinary approach, then on the whole we face a lot of difficulties from the standpoint of systems created, information systems in particular, so there was a need to form the new information and technological basis for construction field, and set of rules and standards which were elaborated, had been elaborated before, were not resolving a number of problems from the standpoint of systematization of this field. And I won't be dwelling upon the problems in details, but basically I can say that currently we have an information collapse on every step between different developers and system developers, and coordination happens at the point of goods production. And to avoid such a problem, we need to constitute a technology which would enable us to gather information on all the stages of the life cycle and to do that in a throughput manner. And Ministry of Construction and Rosatom conducted research of world best practices, and we discussed it together with Standard from the standpoint of elaboration of interdisciplinary system in the field of information modeling, which would embrace not only construction field as the main consumer, but would also have an opportunity to go beyond the framework to provide for this so-called seamless integration, and everything is based on famous methodologies of system engineering. But I would like to draw attention to the fact that from the standpoint of system engineering, we start to work with a huge scope of information we need to process together in the form of a structured process. And moving within the framework of this context, we came up to understanding that information modeling can be regarded as a new methodology of implementation of huge comprehensive projects, which would be constituted on model-oriented and data-oriented approach, and thus we have a question how integrate data correctly, which do exist in the standards. That's why, all in all, we are talking about the fact that information modeling is an interdisciplinary approach to the information which defines the whole set of methodology, approach and managerial effort which provide for the efficient provision of information in its life cycle, and standards are regarded as a model as well. And my colleagues have already mentioned that we need to move away from document flow, e-documents, and shift into the AI if we consider existing documents as models that may be presented as electronic documents, then it will be more feasible for us to work with them. The second point was about harmonization of international practice and Russian reality. We understand that our heritage is a high-quality system of standards that only needs to be coordinated. We can't just import foreign practice into Russia. We need to create a correct relation. Hence, suggestion was made to create a uniform system of information modeling that will be interrelated with all the existing national systems. We had to come to an agreement with Rosatom about unique IDs for the standards, and it's caused why we had to step aside from coding. In the last code of the number of standards, we've added the life cycle so that it's easier to navigate. And the second block, we've added, right away we've entered the relation to the industry. Hence, we provided interdisciplinarity on the same basis. Next is the order number of the standard. There's a scary figure
when we calculated the capacity of this code, we understood that it's possible to create some 12,000 standards. Of course, we don't have such an objective, but for each industry shall find its location. Some ask whether we do have enough capacity or probably opportunities. Yes, they're present. Here is an example of part of the code related to the industries. Now let me brief you on the objectives and tasks. The main objective of modeling or simulation is to create a high quality of simulations. They should be structured in a uniform manner, and then it will be easier to make decisions. In simulation, we should consider not only the technical but also the social issues, hence the more sophisticated field. We need to start modeling the social interaction. As for the technological processes, that's one of the important aspects. Well, I believe an important principle that we're trying to include is the principle of preservation of information, so that from the idea up to the renovation of objects or items, the info is not lost, so that it's either archived or reused. It should exist within two limitations: the norms and technical regulating and business and financing limitations that rule our life. Well, when developing new standards, we talk about universality and life cycle, follow-up about info compatibility, that was mentioned a lot today. The key aspect is the info security. Since when we change the paradigm of processing the info, an important aspect is whether the info received is reliable enough. Who provides the safety and integrity and the security of this data? We have the priority of digital info. Let me underline it. For us, info, from the point of view of the information, it's not the document that matters, but a set of reliable data that we can operate on. Whether these are containers or other forms of info, storage and management, for us the minimum volume of info we can get in a certain field is the source of info for the future automated processing within the model-oriented approach. There's one problem we encounter. At present, the legally valid thing is a document. No matter what we say about digital standards, we'll have an obstacle. The electronic model has no legal force, unfortunately, so far. As soon as the info models shall have legal capacity confirmed by the state, then we can do without the design documents, since we'll get the models that will provide all the necessary information. Next. Quality management. We should organize the roles so that we can provide cooperation of a big number of stakeholders. Reliability of data and security of data, that's another aspect. It's not only the open data that matters, we have different levels of access to the info. They should be considered as well, since the RV standards info should be available for everybody, so it can't be placed in public domain. Now, the cooperation with other and interaction with other standardization systems. Sometimes we take the info, sometimes we are the basis for the new stage of standardization. When we talk about LVS, all the requirements on info models are within the SIM framework. As for the formatting requirements, they remain in SPDS. Later, perhaps they may be transformed in a
С
certain
точки зрения
manner.
ЕСКД там более сложная
There's the
интеграция, потому
KD
что
with a
в ЕСКД
more
определена электронная модель,
comprehensive
это будет
integration.
отдельная
In
задача, как
ESKD,
правильно
there's
совместить
a
информационные модели
separate
и
task
электронные
on
модели.
compatibility of the info
Вот здесь
and
несколько слов о
electronic
цифровых двойниках и о
models.
стандарте, который,
Now, a
собственно
bit
говоря,
about
уже вышел в
digital
сентябре,
twins
утвержден на
and the
цифровые
standard
двойники. Это
that's
такая
already
трепетная, по крайней мере,
approved
для нас
for the
область,
digital twins.
потому
It's
что мы
quite
говорим
a
о том, что мы
topical issue
закладываем, мы
for
используем в качестве
us.
базиса это
As a
компьютерные модели,
basis,
это
we
технический
use computer
комитет
models.
700,
The technical
делаем
committee number
модели информационные,
700.
которые могут послужить
We make the
основой
info
для
models
цифровых
that
двойников.
may be
И
the
в данном
basis
случае
for
вот
digital
мы специально говорим о том,
twins.
что это цифровые двойники
And
изделий или
these are the digital
более сложные
twins
задачи.
of the
Это
items,
цифровые двойники
or, which is
там,
more
например,
difficult, say,
здания,
for example, of buildings,
завода или уже
plants,
города
or
или территории,
cities,
но это более
or
сложные
sites.
вещи, которые на текущий
That's a
момент
more
еще не
comprehensive
стандартизованы и
thing,
не
which is
описаны.
not described
С
or
точки зрения
standardized
гармонизации
yet.
зарубежной практики
Now,
мы планируем
about harmonization of foreign practice,
двигаться следующим путем. Мы
we'll do as
всю
follows.
лучшую практику
All
планируем
the best
анализировать
practices shall
зарубежную,
be
переводить
analyzed,
ее, рассматривать ее
translated.
как ПНСТ, и в
It will be
течение
regarded as
минимум года
PNST,
проводить
and
апробацию и уже
within a
выпускать на
year we'll
основе
do
этого
the testing, and then
апробированный,
on
но
the
российский
basis of
уже
that,
документ
we'll issue
гармонизированный.
a
И,
tested,
собственно говоря, в этом
harmonized
году ожидается,
Russian
что мы выпустим
document. We expect that
15
this
базовых
year
документов,
some 15 basic
которые
documents
послужат,
shall be issued,
инициируют процедуру,
and
собственно
they'll
говоря,
initiate
исключения старых
the
документов,
procedure
которые
of
действуют, и их
excluding of
перевод
the
в эту
old
систему.
documents
Наверное,
and their
я дальше не буду
transfer into
продолжать,
this
потому что
system.
время
I
у
will
нас
not
регламент
continue
маленький,
since
и,
we're running
соответственно,
late.
мне, надеюсь,
And
сложилось у коллеги
I hope, dear
впечатление
colleagues,
о тех
you do have a
стандартах, о той системе,
certain
которую мы сейчас разрабатываем, создаем.
info. You did understand
Спасибо,
what
Сергей Александрович.
system we are creating now. Thank you.
Вот как раз про государственный военный
Now
стандарт
regarding the government military standards
тяжело живется.
and
предприятиям
on
МК,
how
работать
it's
электронных.
difficult for the military
Новиков
enterprises
Владимир,
to
директор по
work.
качеству
Novikov Vladimir will
Главная
tell
организация
that he's the
стратегической
director on quality of
УАК.
Tupolev
Тема доклада
company
«Деятельность подразделений по
producing
стандартизации для
strategic
обеспечения цифрового
airplanes.
изделий вооружений
He'll
военной
tell us
специальности».
about the situation with the military equipment.
Сложившаяся традиция на
Thank you.
пленарном заседании.
At
Хотел бы
the
поздравить всех
plenary
коллег с
meeting, I'd
праздником.
like to congratulate
Регламент у
all
нас
the
ограничен, я
colleagues
постараюсь коротко
with
изложить
the
наше
celebration.
соображение.
I'll brief you on our
Изменение, так скажем, вот тема доклада,
considerations.
да? Изменение
The topic
деятельности
of the
подразделений
presentation
по
is
стандартизации
modification of
в условиях
activity of
цифровой
standardization
трансформации, когда мы переходим от
departments
аналоговой
and the conditions
КД, грубо
of
говоря, бумажной,
digital
к
transformation
цифровой.
when we get from the analog CD to
Что
the
же поменялось,
digital
коллеги? Я
system.
надеюсь, вам будет хорошо
What
видно.
has
Вот
changed,
влево
dear
нормативное, если мы
colleagues?
говорим про
To
нормативное
the
обеспечение
left,
цифрового
you
проектирования,
can see the
как
norms
поменялось
of digital
проектирование.
design.
Далеко
How
не
did
секрет,
the
цифровизация
design
возникла не
change?
вчера, не сегодня, не 3 года
Digitalization
назад.
did not
Каждое
appear 3 years
предприятие,
ago
в силу сложности
or
там,
yesterday.
промышленной продукции,
Each
оно
enterprise
так или иначе поэтапно, но внедряло какие-то цифровые
did
технологии.
introduce certain digital
Сначала это были
technologies
возможно,
stage
какие-то
by
электронные
stage.
документообороты,
First,
потом
there
мы
was the
перешли полностью в
electronic
цифру,
document
перешли
turnover.
в цифровое КД.
Then they
Сейчас
did
существует
the
отечественная система цифрового
digital
проектирования, импортная система цифрового
design,
проектирования. То есть
and
вот
there are
этот слайд,
most
если
both local,
раньше, значит, инструкtor,
Russian and
его
foreign
основной
systems
инструмент был
of
карандаш
digital
Pullman,
design.
большие
Yesterday
бригады,
or
то
in
сейчас
the
это
past,
мощные графические станции, все
they
проектирование.
were
По крайней
drawing
мере,
with a
сейчас
pencil.
государство, как основной
Nowadays,
регулятор
we
отрасли,
have
при
the
создании
relevant
сложных технических
software.
систем, будь то
When
летательный аппарат,
comprehensive technical systems are created,
то же
whether
самое вот отрасль
it's an
железнодорожная, оно задает уже, как
airplane
правило,
or the railroad
проектирование в цифре.
equipment, design is
Соответственно,
usually
меняются технологии, но так и
digitalized.
должно быть, и
Technologies
меняется
get changed.
процедура стандартизации.
So do the
Стандартизируются
procedures
подходы
of
к ним, но, к сожалению,
standardization.
происходит это достаточно
However,
длительно.
this is
Вот мне
happening
отсюда не
with
видно.
a delay.
Стандарт электронной структуры
The
изделия ГОСТ
standard of electronic structure of the item from the year
То есть спустя 10 лет мы
13,
внедрили стандарт
well, only 10 years later we've introduced the standard on the topic. Next, in the year 15, electronic simulation or model of the item. That's the civil industry. As for the military industry, the RV government standard Let me see closer to the slide. Electronic design documents, this term and standard was only introduced in the year 21. That's pretty late. Now regarding the companies' development, the uniform information environment, most of the big companies have already done the deployment, like life cycle management, company resources management, etc. Also, they went from scattered info systems towards the uniform info system of the company. Thus, one may use the data on design documents via CAD system, data on parts, the system of warehousing, the system of accounting. Everything is put together, so you don't need to call the warehouse person or the accountant to find out something. These technologies are being developed. Hence, the standardization department's functions are changing too. Here are the typical functions or obligations of the standardization departments. Methods used to be analog in the past during the paper document turnover. Now it's digital. That's how the standardization departments are working with, using the digitalization. Say documents coordination. Earlier it was exchange of paper documents using email. Nowadays, there's Barista system that works in a raw standard, so coordination takes place in electronic form. There are corporate electronic documents. Now, regarding the management of the electronic form of documents or standardization, earlier that was usually the registrations, libraries, copies, printed copies, paper, logbooks, and lists of introduced documents. Talking about digitalization, it's the access via the info systems, storage systems, for example, the system of management of norms documents, and integrated with the design systems. It's automated forming of the necessary lists of documents in the info systems. We introduced the external documents on standardization, development of documents on standardization. We control traceabilities, and a lot was done in manually. All the remarks were penciled on the documents. It's only the developer who can change, and everything was done in paper copies. Now, in digital, we need control of traceability. There are electronic templates, modeling of business processes, coordination of the systems of electronic document turnover, etc. Now works on unification of the items. Earlier, we've bought and stored the information, now getting it in electronic form. A transfer of data into the information documents. Earlier, there was a consecutive process of coordination and signing on paper. Now coordination may be happening simultaneously in several departments using these SPLM systems. Templates are used, and we do automated checkups. The history of remarks is stored in electronic database as well. This enables to avoid conflicts between the auditing and coordinating bodies. How to attract young experts so that they get involved in standardization? What we have presented illustrates that we don't have the old-fashioned standardization anymore. We need new experts, good in digital technologies. It should have been a part of their education. They should understand what digital standardization is, so that they do have the understanding that nowadays standardizer is a person that works with a big volume of data and with a big number of info systems. Well, we were in the process of transition, and when realizing part of the functions, we encountered a number of problems that are typical not only for us but for the other defense industry companies as well. In Russia, there are no professional standards for experts on standardization in machine building and in the defense industry. Also, the current standards have no status of electronic form of a document. There are no requirements to those. We're still dealing with paper documents. There's no uniform requirements to the format of documents submitted. This was also mentioned by my colleagues. So the problem is really topical. Also, at present, there's no legal status of standardization documents that are classified. It's really a topical issue for us. Well, a problem for us is to make the machine readable or electronic. In this presentation, I wanted to mention not only the problems but also our suggestions. We suggest to form a working group within the committee, perhaps a committee on smart standards, or perhaps in the minutes of this roundtable, we should mention our objectives to make the determination of electronic transfer from the paper to electronic documents, to create a list of necessary attributes of electronic documents, to develop the order of deciding on the legend topicality, the order of transfer of electronic documents to the other organizations, and specialized info systems, to determine the requirements for protection of electronic documents. That's very topical for defense industry. To determine the requirements to the necessary skills of experts in the field of standardization in conditions of digital design work. To the left, you see the way we worked earlier, and they still continue to work the same way at some enterprises. To the right is the future workplace of standardizer, the way it should look in conditions of digital transformation. Whether we'll manage to do this or not, that depends on us. And when resolving the issues, we should always attract the industry representatives and listen to their opinion. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir. I'm the representative of Russian Standardization Institute, and I will say, yes, you are right. That is true. Our institute has the authority for information supply of the industry, and one of the problems is the standards dissemination and distribution. All these standards, especially those related to the military industry, are at present, according to the government standard number 04, may only be distributed in printed form. No electronic documents are provided. Moreover, it should be mentioned that documents on defense items standardization are classified. That's confidential information, and thus it has certain limitations. Thus, the whole system has to be certified in a relevant manner. On top of that, we need a mechanism of transfer of these documents into the systems. It's not available yet. You're quite right. Not into the mic, sorry.
Да, он действует, есть система соответствующая.
Yeah,
просто надо понять, нельзя делать даже вот электронная версия ДСП, такого понятия не существует.
We can't even have the electronic versions of such documents, and I believe it will be done not within the PTK 711, but within the basic standards. First, there'll be an electronic document, and then the electronic document marked classified. That's the way it's going to work. Yes, we need that, since if we don't overcome these obstacles now, later we'll have more difficulties.
Ну вот здесь вот мы сейчас находимся на первом, на втором, да, скорее всего, наверное, даже
And
на
here
первом
we
этапе, да,
are on the
пытаемся
first
перейти на
stage,
второй.
and we're trying to
Сделать
shift to
не
the
то, что
second one,
машиночитаемый текст, а просто оцифровать,
to
перейти
have a
в
digitalized
PDF,
text,
например, распознать.
to transfer
Если
to
мы сейчас не
PDF.
снимем эти барьеры,
If
это
we do
проблемы,
not
которые мы
lift the
показывали уже
barriers
сейчас, они есть.
currently, and we have
Сложно
demonstrated the
представить, какие
barriers which
проблемы будут,
exist,
когда мы
so it's
будем
hard to
переходить на
imagine
следующий этап.
which
Поэтому
problems
я
we
говорю,
will
что тот
encounter
промышленность,
while
который
shifting to the
непосредственно там
next
внизу
stage.
реализует
So
требования,
when we are
которые мы
talking
создали,
about industry
применяет
which
их, может
is
подсказать, наверное,
applying the
какие следующие шаги.
requirements which we
Спасибо,
have
коллеги.
created, then we will have some solutions in
И
place.
заключительный доклад
And our last
Мищенко Игорь
presentation
Олегович,
by
он у
Igor
нас
Mishchenko,
выступает по
who
ВКС,
joins
он хотел бы.
us online.
Здравствуйте, Игорь Олегович.
So, Igor, good afternoon.
Добрый день, коллеги. Меня слышно?
Да, вас слышно.
Colleagues,
Спасибо.
do you hear me?
Значит, Игорь Олегович руководит управлением
Yes, we do.
стандартизации АО РАСУ.
Igor Mishchenko is the head of
Эта компания
standardization
создает интегрированный комплекс решения в сфере
Directorate
автоматизации технологических процессов, а
at
также проводит
Rosatom
полный цикл аттестации,
Automated
сертификации
Control
продукции услуг
Systems.
отраслевых организаций.
And his
И тема доклада
presentation
Игоря Олеговича — это
is
интеллектуальный
called
анализ
Intellectual
нормативной документации.
Analysis
Игорь
of
Олегович, пожалуйста,
Normative
вам слово.
Documentation. So please, Mr.
Коллеги, я
Mishchenko, the
сейчас
floor is yours.
попытаюсь
Colleagues,
демонстрацию экрана.
I will try to share my screen.
Скажите, видно, да?
Do you see it?
Да, видно. На полный экран только
Yes,
выводите,
we do. Thank you. But please make it full screen.
Итак, коллеги, добрый день еще раз.
Colleagues, good afternoon.
Я, наверное,
Once
постараюсь
again, I will try to be brief
о, значит, том опыте
and cover the
небольшом,
experience
с которым мы столкнулись
we
при
have
переходе на, так скажем, на
accumulated
цифру.
while
И
shifting to
тема моего
digital
доклада — это интеллектуальность нормативной
environment,
документации.
and my
Что это
presentation
такое?
is called
Ну, наверное,
Intellectual
буквально
Analysis
короткое вступление
of
историческое,
Normative
почему вообще мы начали
Documentation.
заниматься
A
цифровой
brief
трансформацией,
overview why
интеллектуальной
we
обработкой
have
нормативной
started to deal
документации,
with
в данном случае требованием
digital
стандартов.
transformation.
Значит, несколько лет назад мы вошли
Several
в
years
проект,
ago, we have
проект
entered a
строительства
project, a construction
атомной
project
станции в
of
Финляндии,
a nuclear
Хельсинки.
power
И
station in
наша
Finland,
компания РАСУ является,
and our company
собственно,
RASU
главным поставщиком
is the
систем
main
контроля и управления для этой
supplier
станции.
of
И
control systems for the station.
поскольку мы являемся таким крупным интегратором
And as we
систем
are
контроля
a
и управления,
huge
поставщиком этой
integrator in
станции,
terms of control
мы
systems,
напрямую взаимодействуем с
we
заказчиком,
directly interact
с компанией, которая
with the
строит эту
customer,
станцию,
with the
фирма «Лимон».
company which
И
is
заказчик нам
constructing the
поставил
station,
задачу,
and
собственно, осуществлять проектирование и поставку
we've had a
систем
goal
контроля и управления, значит, исключительно с использованием принципов
to use the
современной, принципов
principles
системной инженерии,
of
в
system
соответствии с
engineering
требованиями регулятора
in
финского,
compliance with Finnish regulator
один из самых
requirements,
передовых ядерных регуляторов в мире.
and
И
it is one of the
всех,
most
собственно,
advanced
передовых
regulators
международных
of the
стандартов.
world, and with the use of
И,
all advanced international
Ну, вот,
practices.
столкнувшись
And
с таким вызовом, мы,
when we
значит, стали
face such a
сначала
challenge,
описывать эти все 28 базовых
we
процессов, то
started
есть
to describe
у себя
28
создавали
basic
процедуры,
processes, and
соответствующие этим процессам.
we have
И,
created
как вы
relative
понимаете, один из
procedures,
ключевых
and
процессов
one of
в
the
этой
key
системе
procedures
инженерии — это система управления
in the
требованиями.
field of
И вот
engineering,
здесь,
that's the requirement
когда мы дошли до
control
значит,
system, and when
детализации
we
требований международных
achieve
стандартов, поскольку
digitalization
мы в этом
of
проекте
the
в основном
requirements of
использовали
international
для систем контроля
standards,
управления
because we were
стандарты
using a
MEC
requirement
и
control
IEEE, это американская,
system
значит, организация
provided by
инженеров-электронщиков, значит,
and American
на этой станции, соответственно, мы
Electronic Association,
были
we had
оцифровывать
to
эти
digitalize
стандарты.
the
И вот в
standards,
рамках проекта
and
у
within the
нас
framework,
этих стандартов, вот так, для понимания, порядка 1000.
we
И,
had
соответственно,
approximately
если каждый
1000
стандарт
standards,
содержит там,
and if
ну,
every
порядка
standard
50 там,
has
до
approximately
нескольких сот требований, да, в среднем мы получили,
50
что
or 100 requirements,
количество требований, которые
then
нам нужно
number of
проекту, это порядка
requirements
100 тысяч требований.
is
Это только требования
accounts for
стандартов, обращаю ваше внимание,
100,000,
потому
and
что
that is
существует
only
еще
about
большой пласт
standards, as there is a huge
требований UV-гайдов, так называемых,
number of
требований
guidelines
регулятора как раз ядерного.
connected
Это аналог,
with a nuclear
например,
regulator
наших
requirement, and that's
нормы
also
правил в атомной энергетике.
set
И,
of our
конечно
norms
же,
and
требования
rules
TC
in
контракта.
nuclear
То есть это
sector,
еще
and also
там
rules
порядка
connected with
также 100
agreements,
тысяч требований. То есть
execution
в
and contract
совокупности мы должны были
execution. So all
управлять
in all, we
несколько
had
стами,
to manage
ну, и
several
управляем
hundreds
несколько стами тысячами требований.
hundreds of thousands of requirements. And
когда мы оценили такой объем, мы поняли,
when we
что своими
evaluated,
силами
estimated such a volume,
конечно же, оцифровать такое количество стандартов не
we
удастся
understood
в
that
той
it's
сроке,
hard
которые
to
оговорены.
digitalize
Поэтому,
such an amount of
соответственно, мы
standards,
вот
and
придумали такой
relatively,
инструмент,
we invented such an
по сути,
instrument, which is
оцифровщик
basically
требований
a
стандартов. И вот
digitalization
если говорить о
tool for
тех
requirements and
слайдах,
standards.
которые
And if we
докладчики
talk about the
мне
slides
показывали,
which have
то
been
это как раз,
demonstrated
наверное,
before,
третий уровень
then
и
that's the
попытка
third
перехода на
level and an
четвертый уровень.
attempt
То
to
есть
shift
мы
to the fourth level,
переводим
and we
требования
transfer
стандартов в
requirements
машинопонимаемый
into
формат,
the
пытались перевести.
machine-readable format.
То есть мы
And
создали такое приложение
we've
у
created
себя,
an application
значит, которое позволяет
which allows
делать,
us to
ну, собственно, обрабатывать стандарты,
process
выделять из них
standards and
требования, ну, то есть, по
to
сути, все
define the
сущности,
requirements and
и
the overall essence,
перекладывать их в систему
and to
управления
transfer
требованиями,
them
которая
to the
уже
system of
и осуществляет
requirement
управление
control,
этими требованиями.
which
Для
is
информации у нас
conducting the
в
process
качестве
itself.
системы,
And
ну,
as a
информационного
system,
управления требованиями
information
используется
system,
Enterprise Architect. Это, значит, такой известный софтверный продукт.
we
И
use
вот
quite a famous software
проблематика
product,
здесь на
and the
этом слайде
problematics
обозначена. У
is
нас,
defined on the slide, and
собственно, была это основная проблема, это
basically
как бы потеря времени при оцифровке
we faced
требований. И
problems
вот наш
connected
продукт,
with the
он
loss of
существенно
time
позволяет
used
сократить
for digitalization,
оцифровку
and
этих
now our
требований.
product enables us to
Вот
decrease the time spent
бизнес-процесс,
for this.
который, собственно, я
And
сейчас описал вам коротко. Значит, здесь
that's
мы
what I briefly
показываем,
described,
как
and here we
планируем
show
управлять
how we plan
требованиями в проекте
to manage
Хантикеев.
the
И вот
requirements,
наше решение, оно
and
выделено
our
здесь
solution
синим квадратиком.
is
Значит, то
defined
есть
with
это,
a
по сути,
blue square,
формализация требования и формирование блока
which is
требований,
connected with requirements
идентифицированных, которые
formalization
затем
and
ложатся,
establishment of the block of
ну,
requirements, which are after that
значит, переходят в систему управления требованиями.
embedded to the system
Значит,
of requirements control.
здесь что важно
And
сказать?
what's important to say here, the standards
делятся у нас, классифицируются, ну или
are
вернее,
classified,
каждая сущность текста выделяется
and
и
each essence of the
классифицируется на
text
следующие
is
составляющие: заголовок, подзаголовок,
defined and
непосредственно само
classified as
требование,
a title, subtitle,
сопутствующая
requirement
информация,
itself,
рисунок
relative
и таблица.
information,
Вот
drawing, and a
на
table.
эти сущности, по сути,
And
наш
those
алгоритм,
parts
который использует, в общем,
are connected
технологии
with the
машинного обучения,
algorithm,
он
which is
классифицирует
using the technologies
каждый
of machine
из
learning, and it is
кусочков
classifying every
нормативного документа.
part
Вот как,
of the normative
ну,
document,
как бы
and
схематично выглядит
that's how
наше
it looks
решение.
like in the
Всё это
form of the
реализовано в виде
scheme. Everything is
веб-приложения
implemented
с
in the form
веб-интерфейсом.
of web
По сути,
application with web
мы,
interface,
ну, то есть
and
все сотрудники могут, и даже там,
all the
сотрудники
employees
других
and
организаций могут
employees of
через
other
интерфейс,
organizations
веб-интерфейс, то есть
can
через
use the
интернет
interface or use
заходить,
internet
значит,
to
загружать стандарты,
have an access
значит,
and to
которые
upload
им необходимо
standards which are
оцифровать.
needed.
Дальше приложение
And after
работает
that,
в
an
два основных
application
этапа.
works
Оно,
in two stages,
значит,
and
томизирует текст стандарта,
it
то есть, по
makes
сути,
a
выделяет
text of
элементарные
standards
кусочки
customized.
текста.
It
И
defines
затем с помощью
pieces of this
машинного
text, and
обучения,
after that, with the help of
с
machine
технологией
learning,
машинного обучения,
with the use of the
этот текст
technologies of machine
классифицируется,
learning, this text is
и
classified,
вот получается такой вот, вы видите здесь экселевский файл,
and thus we
который
get a
содержит,
file
по сути,
which contains,
идентификатор, если мы
basically
говорим по
identifies, if we
текст
talk
непосредственно
about
самого
major blocks
требования
and the text
и
itself, the text of the
результат
requirement,
классификации.
and the result
То
of
есть, как я уже
classification.
сказал, это либо
As I have
заголовок,
already said, that
это
is
либо
either
требование
title or
само,
subtitle
либо
or
информация какая-то
requirement
сопутствующая,
or some relative
либо рисунок, либо
information
таблица.
or a drawing or a table.
Собственно, здесь
And
показано, как
basically here
это
we
выглядит.
demonstrate how it looks like,
Здесь вам видно
and I
сейчас.
hope you
То есть
see
вот
it.
это веб-приложение,
And that's a web application, web
позволяет
interface,
загрузить
which allows
от
us to
одного до,
upload
собственно, несколько десятков стандартов. Дальше вот они
several
с
dozens of
помощью нажатия
standards, and
клавиш
after that,
достаточно просто очень обрабатываются
we process it by
и
clicking a
затем
button, and
загружаются уже
we upload
пользователю в
them
виде
to the user
Excel-файлов,
in the
которые
form of
затем
an
он
Excel
может,
file,
вот как раз Excel-файл
which can
открывается,
be
показана структура,
used.
и дальше затем каждый файл атомизированного стандарта загружается в систему управления требований, в данном случае Enterprise Architect.
And that's how you see that
Коротко
how
скажу о
enterprise
технологии,
of
которые мы используем в нашем
interfaces
приложении.
work. And briefly about the technology we use in our
В качестве,
application.
ну я как сказал уже, двухстадийная у
And
нас схема
as I
работы
have already said, we have
алгоритма,
the
и
scheme,
первый
which contains
стадия,
two
первый этап —
stages,
это
and the first
атомизация,
stage
фрагментация текста.
is a fragmentation of the text. It is conducted with the use of algorithms. We use machine learning, and basically with the use of these algorithms, we fragment the text into different elements and into different pieces. And on the second stage, it's much more complicated, and there are two sub-steps. That's transferred to the vector space of each space, and after that, we translate the text to this space with the use of technology of TF and EDF, and that's the algorithm which is quite famous, technology which is quite famous, and afterwards, with the use of methodology, GBoost, we have algorithm learning and classification. And on this slide, we see the brief overview of the use of machine learning, and the quality is connected with classic methods of the assessment of algorithms of machine learning, and actually the basic parameters are connected with precision and fullness, and the more precise they are, the higher quality of the algorithm is. And if we talk about the sampling we used for learning, and we had this sampling created by a man, so something which has been done manually, it was classified and divided into several dozens of standards, and the overall sampling embraced almost 4,000 fragments, and half of this sampling was used as the test one, and the second one was used for algorithm learning. That's approximately 1,800 fragments. And as a result, our test algorithms, its first version, the precision yielded is 90% in 90% cases. Our algorithm is quite precise and correct in terms of text fragments classification, and you see a joke demonstrated which explains how it works in reality, but due to the lack of time I won't be going into details, and I think I will say a couple of words how we verified the results we got, because as you understand, it was very important, and as we faced problems because there are no ready-to-use methods and methodologies, we had to create something from scratch, and we couldn't invent something wiser than doing some man-made registration. We took several dozens of standards processed by an algorithm, and after that, in a reverse manner, a man was controlling how classification was made of those pieces, of those fragments of the text. And here, the essence, what was identified as mistakes made, or the problems of the first test version of the algorithm. Here you see the three types of mistakes defined, and of course we had some inappropriate fragment classifications, because the algorithm was using the machine learning technology, which is not perfect, and of course there are different alternatives and opportunities, and we know where the space for improvement is. But still the mistakes were made, and primarily it was connected with such fragments as information, title, and drawing. There were problems connected with identification of each fragment, as it's quite a basic element. And here I would like to say that we understand how to work with that, and the latest version of the algorithm has the second type of mistakes eliminated, and we think that we resolved this issue. And the third type of issues, of problems present,
связан с трансформацией текста.
is
Он
purely
некоторые
transformational.
символы,
It is
тире,
connected
точек, там,
with
двоеточие и
transformation
так
of
далее,
symbols as
которые в достаточно
hyphen
большом
or
количестве
colon,
встречаются в тексте,
semicolon, which are quite
преобразовывались,
frequent
некорректно,
in the
условно говоря,
text, and they were
преобразовывались.
inappropriate in terms of
И
transformation,
во фрагмент попадала
and
некорректная информация, но тем не менее она,
inappropriate information
если вот с
was
точки зрения обработки
penetrating the
человекопонимания,
fragments,
она
but
никоим образом
from the
не
standpoint
мешала
of understanding,
интерпретировать
it was
текст.
not
И
hindering
да, надо
the
сказать, что
an
это
opportunity to
тоже
interpret
как
the
бы не
text.
страшно, ну, такой
And of course,
понятно, как
that's
устраняется такой тип ошибок. Сейчас мы также дорабатываем,
quite a clear problem to be managed, and we elaborate on that,
Ну
and
и
we
в целом,
hope
как бы резюмируя то, что я
to
сказал,
resolve the issue. And to conclude,
мы у себя в компании, собственно,
in our company,
создали такой пилотный
we have
проект,
created this pilot
который
project, which
заключается в том, что мы разработали алгоритм, который
is
позволяет
about devising an algorithm which allows us to make the first step to digitalize standards from the standpoint of their transfer
требования,
to requirements, their
однозначно, и,
identification,
значит, подготовки для загрузки
and
системы управления
preparation to
требованиями.
be uploaded to
То
the
есть надо
system
понимать, что
requirement control
этот
system.
наш
And we
алгоритм,
need to
он
understand that this
служит прежде всего
algorithm is
для,
first and foremost
как бы, если образно говорить, это такой подносчик снарядов для загрузки в систему управления требованиями. То есть он
is a
прежде всего
preparational
нам
stage
позволяет
for
очень
the
сильно сократить
uploading
время на
tool to the
подготовку
system because it
материалов,
decreases
информации, да,
time for the
для
preparation of material and
создания вот
information
этой
for
вот
the
системы.
creation
Потому
of
что,
the
как
system.
мы понимаем, все-таки конечной
Because we
целью нашей
understand
является
that our
создание
final goal is the
не просто
establishment
перевод документов
is not just transfer or
требований,
translation
да,
of
а именно
documents into
дальнейшая
requirements, but
загрузка в систему управления
further
требованиями.
uploading
Только
into
так
the requirement control
они,
system, because
мы
only
можем перейти уже,
this will
собственно,
enable
как
us
это
to
предыдущие
transfer,
докладчики говорили, на четвертый
to
этап.
shift to the
И
fourth
вот, по
stage, as
сути,
it has been
наш
mentioned
алгоритм,
by
на
the
мой
previous
взгляд,
speakers. And basically, our
является таким
algorithm
промежуточным
is
этапом.
an interim
Как
stage,
мне
and
кажется,
as
да,
I see it,
возможно, я не прав, поправьте,
maybe I'm
коллеги, но
wrong,
все-таки он таким
but
мостиком между третьим и четвертым
it's a
этапом,
bridge
вот,
between the
опять же,
third
в
and
тех
the
схемах,
fourth
которые мы
stage in the
приводили.
scheme
И
everyone has
я
demonstrated,
предлагаю
and I would
просто
like
тоже вам
to
обратить внимание, возможно, кому-то
offer to
уже
to
сейчас,
pay attention
возможно,
to that. Maybe
он сможет
even
помочь
now this
в текущей
algorithm will be
действительности.
helpful to some
Вот.
of
Но
you,
однозначно нам он точно
but
помог, и мы здесь
undoubtedly it was very helpful for us.
ну,
And
значительно, там, порядка, по самым грубым подсчетам, мы ну, на 50%
according to the rough
сократили
estimates, we
время,
decreased
которое
time
нам
by
необходимо
50%
для
time
подготовки
needed
информации для
for
загрузки системы
information
управления
preparation and
требованиями.
its uploading to the
Вот, то
requirement
есть
control
эффект, ну, на
system.
наш взгляд,
And the
просто
effect
колоссальный.
is a
Вот.
huge
И,
one and
возможно, кому-то он,
tremendous.
конечно, тоже будет полезен
And I think
такой
maybe it would be
инструмент.
helpful for some of you.
И что здесь нужно еще
And
сказать, что
what's
да,
needed,
он,
what's
конечно, не
important to
идеален,
say,
он
of course, it's
обрабатывает
not
сейчас пока в
ideal.
основном требования только работает с английским языком, с требованием
It's currently working only with the English language, with the IEC requirements, ISO requirements, and IEEE.
Значит, но точно мы совершенно понимаем, что мы
We
можем
do understand precisely
расширить
that
возможность алгоритма,
we can extend the opportunities of the algorithm to transfer to other types of standards. We do understand that we need to work with the Russian text, and we try to streamline our algorithm for that. It is already working with the Russian state standards, but classification quality is much lower, at the level of 70%, if we talk about statistics, and of course due to the fact that initial data is connected with the documents of the previous century of poor quality. We face huge problems from the standpoint of fragmenting for the text to be interpreted and classified by a machine. And when the document is of poor quality, it's almost impossible to do that. And the third problem is work with drawings and tables, and we are working very actively with it, and we try to do it that way, to transfer tables into separate requirements for machines to understand that. And in a pilot variant,
просто отдельный объект воспринимается.
We perceive it as a separate variant in the system of requirements control.
To our mind, that it's an interim solution. However, it is a solution. And in the standards regarding the systems of control and operation, there aren't that many drawings, unlike the documents used by the railroad people and in the metal industry. Their documents are mainly tables with info on dimensions and properties. The last slide explains how we are planning to develop our solutions. It is yet the initial stage. The first steps were made without any info or knowledge on experience of other organizations. I'm very much with my colleagues in this regard. For us to switch to the fourth stage of this beautiful plan, we need to clarify about the classifiers and to get it decided on the level of the federation or of the industry, like they did in Rosatom nuclear agency. The railroad people could do the same in the ministry. Actually, the classifiers should be federal, clear, understandable. Then we'll be able to identify and classify our requirements. The fourth stage, believe me, is coming soon, and practice proves it's possible. It's not a technical issue, it's rather an organizational issue. Our case proves that technically everything is possible, and it's not that difficult to get that organized from the point of view of AI and machine learning. The language existing and the methodology that we have already enables us to switch to the fourth stage. However, we won't be able to do it without having a classifier. That's it with my opinion. Thanks for your attention.
Игорь Олегович, спасибо огромное
Thank
за
you,
ваш
Igor,
доклад.
for your presentation.
Время у нас закончилось.
Our time is over. The session shall be continued in 10 minutes. I suggest to
Мы не продолжаем. Здесь дальше другое
make
мероприятие.
a break. We're not continuing here. A
Еще раз
different
огромное
event will take
спасибо
place here.
докладчикам за интересные,
Thanks again
содержательные
to the
доклады. Спасибо
speakers
большое.
for their very interesting and very informative
Раз, два, три, работает. Давайте начинать. Коллеги,
Let's begin.
значит, вот, наверное, месяца не проходит,
Distinguished colleagues,
чтобы не пришло приглашение на какую-нибудь
every month
IT-конференцию.
we seem to get invitations to certain IT conferences. There's plenty of those, but I would single out three of them. That's my personal opinion. I may be wrong. The first is IT for defense industry. Second is this one. And I believe for 3 years in a row, these conferences get more and more interesting and well organized. The third one shall take place in the end of November, namely on the 24th of November, IT Standard Conference. You're all invited. We do our best to improve, and today's event is not just a session. It's a meeting of the Intra-Departmental Council on IT of the Committee of the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists on the industrial policy and technical regulation. That's the name. This meeting of Interdepartmental Council is an open one, and we should decide what will get modified in our field. May I have my first slide, please? Now I managed to click the slides. Now I have no more slides. Seem to be pushing the same button, but the results are different. Well, we've created this council in the year 2008, and we were mainly dealing with our topics. Technical committees were developing the standards, and we paid more attention to the normative documents, starting with the law on standardization. That's the way it was till the year 2020. Due to common modifications and approaches, we have changed too. We now want to become an assembly point of all the important fields that should develop the transfer to the new industrial revolution. We need that assembly point. We're trying to get it organized. The first thing we sensed together with Andrei in the end of the year 2020, we noticed that there are many technical committees dealing with the standards. They're really numerous. Some are bigger, some are smaller. So the idea came how to coordinate their activities within the Industrialist Union Committee. So we've decided to create a center of coordination. We had a meeting on the topic in the end of the year 20. Later, due to certain circumstances, the work slowed down, but later we restored it. Boris, who will make a presentation later, decided to head this committee. So it was being formed, that coordination council, it's called Coordination Council. For a year it was being formed. We understood that our activities are correct and we should get them developed. We'll tell you where what we're doing and where we're moving. Besides the Coordination Council, we've created an expert group, and it was headed by Sergei Pugachev, the employee of the National Pipe Company. He used to be the deputy head of Standard. This is also a difficult work. He couldn't make it here due to vaccination issues. However, Mr. Valery Lotsman, the deputy chair of our committee, the banners behind us, undertook the labor to make, to deliver both his and his own presentation, so we'll allocate a bit more time for him. I will not tell you precisely what we'll do in the next year. I will tell you what fields we'll be active in, and everyone is invited. Experts, new members of the technical committees, will be happy to cooperate with you, with representatives of the industry, who should be the main consumers of results of our activities. So we want to organize this assembly point to get away from our primary functions like standards and norms. Well, there are 8 fields of activities that we would like to get involved in. That's standardization, popularization, providing of information. I'll later brief you on that and explain what we are planning to do. So, if you have any suggestions in the field, we'll be happy to hear from you. So, the Interdepartmental Council was a uniform structural division of the committee, and within it we are creating a Coordination Council working in the field of digital transformation, and the Coordination Council develop it. Can somebody help me with the slides? What if I just give a command? Please provide the next slide. Now, standardization issues. I don't want to discuss the Coordination Council. Boris will tell us on that. Just one slide. These are the technical committees that voluntarily entered the Coordination Council. I was concerned that their participation shall be only formal, but that wasn't the case. Everything is quite interesting and efficient. Boris will later tell you about it. Some other committees are planning to join us later on. The situation is pretty interesting, and the last committee mentioned is on digital standards. They have also entered our Coordination Council. One of the objectives of this council is to avoid double work when forming standardization programs, to determine the common priorities, and to discuss the issues necessary at resolution of certain problems. The name of Coordination Council is Standards of Digital Development. But that's not enough. The field is broader. Let me give you an example. There's a narrow field of the Committee on Digital Standards. That's their own, but how can they work without knowing what's happening in the field of information protection standardization? So this yellow circle around the orange one Since the technical committee is dealing with the bigger field, we regard all the specific fields in certain trends, separate standards, digital standards, AI, etc. Coordination Council has chairs, while the Expert Council includes experts in the fields that will provide their opinions. Second point is rather difficult. That's the work with the Berista thing and the work with technical committees. Everyone dealing with Berista understands its pros and cons, and the Berista has its certain things. There's the info system for the authorities that should provide information, starting from forming the national standardization program up to the draft of the standard, adoption and dissemination of the standard. But Berista doesn't do things that the technical committees should do. There's a lot of issues on selection of priority standards, on the development of the text, on creation of a uniform terminology, etc. So we need a certain cooperation with Berista. So with Codex company, we started to cooperate, to work in cooperation, trying to do this. There won't be a distinct division like on the screen. Some tasks shall refer to both sides. We've started this work. By summertime, I believe the first options will appear, and the system shall get more or less viable. The code has, Codex company has enough opportunities and energy to do that. Next point is training of personnel. It's quite a comprehensive task. We came to a conclusion that next year we should organize a separate conference, a good, well-prepared conference. Educational establishments are ready to participate. They understand the importance of the issue of training personnel in the field of IT. I understand the issue since I'm the head of the chair of mathematical substantiation or support of standardization. So serious educational establishments shall be involved. We're already beginning to prepare that conference, and we're planning to have it in October of the next year. Your opinions and suggestions are welcome. Life is changing. New things are appearing, so we should get new things. We should become innovative as well. It's not an easy task to train a skilled IT engineer. The next field is popularization. Vladimir shall confirm that in the industry they say that there are no IT standards existing. There are issues of coordination, but there are no standards existing. And they're quite frank when saying that. I haven't read the book, but I dislike it, so to say. Well, the plans for the next year are quite serious. We have a site that is run by our committee. Codex company has a good portal as well. Next year, we think will unite both sides to provide good info for the people, especially for the representatives of the industry. We have our own journal called IT Standards. It's an electronic journal. It's regularly published. Next year we're planning to get it to a higher level, and you are welcome to participate in publishing of this journal. Please provide your materials. You may have your article printed there, or you may participate in the development of this journal's policy. That's our plan for the next year. Business modeling. We are cooperating with Germany a lot within the Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is something made in Germany, and to differ ours from German, we call it Russian Industry 4.0. This slide was made because in Germany they have allocated 4 pillars of what's to be done in the field of IT, so that the fourth industrial revolution does take place. Pillar number 6 is the tool for assessment of quality of decisions made. Now it's done in an empirical manner. Now they believe big main task is big data, Industry 4.0, Internet of Things, etc. That's not quite the truth. It's necessary to assess the number of decisions made according to German assessments. They have already resolved this task by some 20–30%. They now have a new stage. It's called Mission 2030. By the year 30, they want this number to be 100%.
And I would like to thank the city of St. Petersburg for the presence of universities which are ready to enter the system and to start elaboration of such business models which allow us to start the assessment. That's one of the directions for the next year. It doesn't mean that we will be able to resolve it next year, but still it's very important to initiate, to feel something's feasible. As time is limited, I will give more time to Andrei Lotsmanov, because he's representing several people, and still we have the session of our Interdepartmental Council, and we have quite a brief solution, but I won't be reading it out loud. But if there are any proposals or any amendments, we'll be very happy to listen to them. So, this is it. What I wanted to say from the standpoint of our future plans, and after that we have digitalization for structural departments of the Council and industry representatives who will dwell upon their issues and the problems they face, and I think it will be very efficient and productive. So, I won't be asking the questions, but maybe at the end someone would ask. We'll leave some time at the end to have an opportunity for Q&A session. Thank you very much. Mr. Lotsmanov, thank you. I'm very happy to welcome you at our session, and we were bold enough to use the banner of the committee, as I would like to tell you more about the work of the committee and to talk about new directions as well.
Задача нашего комитета уже
The
много
goal
лет
of our
руководит
committee
Александр Шпумпянский. Задача простая.
has
Это
been simple
объединить мнение
for many
промышленности,
years to
экспертного
unite
сообщества
industry,
и
expert
довести это
community,
мнение
and
до органов
to
власти и
translate
добиться, чтобы
their
при
opinion
принятии
to the
решений, при
authorities,
принятии новых нормативно-правовых актов они максимально учитывали
to
предложения
take
и мнения
such
и
proposals,
интересы
opinions,
непосредственно
views and
промышленности.
interests of industry into
В
account
рамках
while
нашего
decision making.
комитета было создано
And within the
несколько
framework of the committee, we
межотраслевых советов. Вот в
created and
ноябре
established several
межотраслевой совет
interdepartmental
по
councils. In October,
стандартизации для нефтегазового
Interdepartmental
комплекса
Council
будет
for
проводить в Петербурге
Standardization for Oil and Gas
юбилейную 15-ю
field
конференцию
will hold the anniversary
«Нефтегаз
15th
Решением этой
conference Oil
конференции
and
в
Gas
2007
Standard.
году было необходимость разработки закона о
Its establishment in
стандартизации.
2007 was connected with the need for the standards elaboration in the field, and it's working quite successfully currently.
Позволяет выработать общие важные
Joint
решения,
effort allows us to elaborate important decisions
добиться выполнения этих решений.
to see those decisions made and implemented thanks to the joint effort as well. Of course, currently we face different conditions, but still, today it's very important and it works efficiently. In July, in a prom conference, we held a major conference, and during the plenary session, Mikhail Mishustin has set an ambitious goal of Russia's transfer to the sixth technological mode and establishment of the flexible set of tools for the increased performance and increased number of high-tech jobs, and decreased costs and expenditures, and it can be done only with the shift to digital transformation and execution of digital transformation in for our industry. And standardization system and conformity assessment was created 120 years ago, when first locomotives emerged and first cars emerged, but currently we see new interactions not only between or among people or enterprises, but among fields and industries in the cloud, and it is connected with the need for new standards and requirements and procedures for conformity assessment, and it has been mentioned already. And what is Industry 4.0? What is this term about? We have scrutinized this process in Germany very well. We did that profoundly thanks to the work of our joint council with the Germans, and we had a visit to Volkswagen plant in February 2019. And what is it about? I'm an employee of the major metallurgy company. Tomorrow, technologists will set the parameters for the rig and for the well. Computer will design this well. As experts say, with the use of unmanned technology. Computer is designing a well. Computer is selecting which kind of a bore is needed for this field. The computer is choosing the type of the bore and the producer. And for instance, Gazpromneft, as a producer, is ordering the bore from a metallurgy company, and it is produced according to the order specifications, and after that it is shipped to Gazpromneft, to this well. And everything is done with the use of unmanned technologies. The same way we get our fines for overspeeding without any collision with traffic wardens. We just get our fines via post or via email, so the same will be applicable for oil and gas industry, and we saw something similar at Volkswagen. When you order a car, you put in characteristics and parameters you need for the car, color, materials, etc. And computer is ordering this disk, for instance. Computer is planning the overall process for it to be produced, delivered to the shop and taken to the conveyor belt. The moment your car will be at the conveyor belt, and each car has its own drawing, its own print of the wheel, and that's Industry 4.0. Without unified standards, computers won't be understanding each other. So, why our mobile phones work in a similar mode in Petersburg, Beijing, and New York? Because the standard is single. And we also need single standards, which would coincide with the international system. Today, unfortunately, among 3,000 IT standards, a bit more than 150 are adopted. And I've been talking a lot with the experts in IT field, and I have been discussing that with IT director at one major and a very successful company. And when I was talking about the standards, I was told that no standards are present, that they were not using the standards. There are some protocols, but still. He has different decisions made according to different standards. But I told him that enterprises need to interact, and only then he understood why it is needed. He said that he had to have a unified system for 22 plants, and he had 320 IT systems there, and he couldn't unite them. Professionals do call it a zoo, and to avoid having such a zoo in the scale of industry of the Russian Federation, and to avoid having a zoo within the framework of Eurasian Union, and to avoid having a zoo when Russia has one standards and Germany has other standards, we need to have unified standards and common understanding of those standards on the state level. I have a picture on the bottom side. Railway in Europe and in Russia. Those who traveled to Europe by train remember long pauses at Brest, at the border, to change the gauge, because the width of the gauge is different in Russia and in Europe. So, it was said appropriately about the work of the Interdepartmental Council, and we will also talk about the work of the Coordination Council, and it was an appropriate decision to establish it, and one of the leading technical committees for standardization in the field of digital technologies involves cybersecurity, smart production are united in one entity. And they established an ecosystem for standardization because the problems are similar and a lot of goals are connected and are to be resolved by joint effort to avoid duplication. And we prepared a proposal for standardization in the strategy prepared by Ministry of Trade and Industry, and those proposals have been forwarded to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and I hope they will be taken into account. And Boris Pozniev will tell you more about the Coordination Council, but yesterday we had the session of the Project Technical Committee for Standards, and we saw a lot of intersections, and problems need to be resolved by joint effort, because we have problems on the edge of different topics, issues, and technical committees, and of course, Without unified rail, without unified IT standards, it's impossible to constitute Industry 4.0, but as all experts tend to say, if Russia doesn't constitute Industry 4.0, Russia will lag behind forever. We will remain to be a resource base for developed countries. So it's very important to resolve this issue. We have effort, we have resources, we have experts for that. So I hope that our work for standardization will help us to resolve these issues, and currently this problem is being resolved and the program is being prepared on the level of the Eurasian Union, and we are ready to take part in that as well, and we offer to create a coordination council under the auspices of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, or maybe under the auspices of the government, for all the relevant ministries and industries take part in the program for the establishment of the unified system of the Eurasian Economic Union. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lotsmanov. I remember this situation reminded me the one described in the story by Nikolai Leskov. We need to understand that without timely transfer to Industry 4.0, we will lag behind forever, and we need to deal with the standards, not just deal with the standards separately, and personnel training. We need to do that in a comprehensive manner, and that's the vector we are opting for. And now, in terms of the State Center for Standardization, Metrology and Tests, we have quite a poor interaction, and I think it's also us to blame for that, but we need to resolve it somehow, to reinforce it somehow. So I would like to give the floor to Denis Mironov. And he will talk about the performance improvement in the digital environment, basing on the experience of Center for Standardization, Metrology and Tests. Thank you very much. We've always had a very positive and constructive dialogue, and I would like to wish us to continue that way, because we resolve all the issues by texting or by phoning each other. So the topic of my today's presentation is more applicable, because that's one of the first examples for streamlining the zoo from the standpoint of information constituent parts, because standardization yields a lot of information systems which are not coordinating with each other, and quite often there are a lot of intersections, and for instance, quite often operators have to use 3 front offices, for instance, or there are a lot of other intersections, and we need to understand that there is a unified center implemented by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and it unites more than 2,000 of major enterprises. And it unites almost all the enterprises which are supported on the federal level and regional level. And the goals and tasks of State Information System are connected with facilitation of enterprises' operations for them to be able to implement almost all their needs using the platform. And it is the part of Rosstandart system, and as we know, Rosstandart is a federal agency under the auspices of Ministry of Industry and Trade. In particular, Our centers are local representations of enterprises which provide for all the metrology needs, test needs, and conformity assessment needs. All the enterprises represented in state information system are basically our clients, and the clients of centers for standardization and metrology in their own regions. And we communicate in different manners. For instance, Nizhny Novgorod Center has its own communication channel with the enterprises, and all in all we have 68 centers, and all of them have their own background. There is no unification, and it is first and foremost inefficient. Second, there is no general overview from the standpoint of services provided for enterprises. Third, there are difficulties with document flows, mutual transactions, test protocols, and control protocols, and data input in the case when the standards are devised, but that's not quite a frequent situation. But frequently, we need to introduce information to state information system Arshin, and that's a frequent problem we encounter. And we discussed that frequently all the services of Rosstandart are to be embedded in the front office of information system pромышленность to get access to all the services provided by Rosstandart. On the slide, you see the architecture of the information system промышленность. It's quite a major system, information system, and we offer to supplement it with our services. So what is the model of interaction we provide for? That's the shift, changing the rails, and with the use of the joint exchange protocol, with the use of internal systems of our center and information system pромышленность, and thus we will have one front office used for operations and for work. Without using different accounts or different front offices, there will be one which will unite all the services which are needed for an enterprise. In our case, that's about metrology services, test facilities, certification and approval, inspection authorities if needed. An enterprise gets an executor from the system of Rosstandart, as quite frequently we also need services provided by state metrology institutes or of the Russian Standardization Institute. There is an interaction with an enterprise, services yielded, and relevant input is done in information system Arshin or Beresta, and in some cases enterprises save time, money, and it becomes more comfortable from the standpoint of a unified platform. The ministry gets the unified analytics, and Rosstandart gets unified analytics for its own subordinate entities, and also provides analysis for the Ministry of Trade and Industry.
The pilot project is suggested to be ready at Nizhny Novgorod organization. I'm its director. We act not only in Nizhny Novgorod region, we also cooperate with Rosatom, Gazprom all over the country, with the other big government corporations, and our accreditation enables the company to act in different regions of Russia. For the third year in a row, we use the one-stop shop system. If our accreditation is not sufficient to provide a turnkey service, we include the other enterprises within the Rosstandart system and resolve all the issues for the customer company. And it's all done within one-stop shop system. It's convenient. That's a simple suggestion. If we get it implemented, it will enable us to optimize the business processes. Those lean technologies shall be used. It's not a standard yet, but it's at least a common approach and less iterations to get the raw standard services. Thanks for the attention. Questions are welcome. Questions are coming in the end. Again, we're talking about the same things. Common information system needs to be created. We have a certain experience of creating big info systems, and now we shouldn't miss the time. The further goes the development of each separate system, the more difficult it will be to get them united and to make them common. We should start trying, since it's not an easy task, but we'll do our best. Now, things that have already been announced. Boris Mikhailovich, the chair of Coordination Council. His activity isn't that simple. Imagine this year there's 11 technical committees. We use mechanization and automation. Yeah, these technical committees are not an easy thing to do. Let me tell you once again, I was scared it will be formal, but no. They work efficiently, they've gained some experience, and I believe the next year shall be even more effective. Thank you. I'm trying to learn how to switch the slides. It works. Dear colleagues, after 2 or 3 presentations, especially those by Sergei and Anatoly, I only need to add some details to description of the issue. People who are really dealing with the development of standards in quite a number of fields. Today we're talking about the field of digital development. And first of all, that's the development of the national system of standards that shall support the promising Industry 4.0. It's not a direct analog of foreign Industry 4.0, it's Russian Industry 4.0. Our German colleagues are working for already a decade, officially since the year 11. They expect serious results 10 years later, and we are yet in the beginning of that way. So we need to hurry up, and the people are dealing with standardization on a serious mode already sensed that.
С некоторым замедлением. Но я хотел бы обратить ваше внимание, может быть, на 3 момента.
Drive your attention to 3 points.
Стандартизация как основа
Standardization as the basis for innovative development, forming of national digital industry. That's one of the main objectives for the promising development of our country. Raw materials resources are depleted or shall be depleted. It's 30-70 years. According to the forecast, we need to think about future generations, and the industry may keep us in a good place among the well-developed countries. Next is globalization of expert community. We can't resolve such issues locally. To consolidate experts, we needed to cooperate. It's not by chance that this coordination council was created. The colleagues did some preparatory works, and they realized the level of their responsibility for the strategic development of Russian Industry 4.0. Now, let me tell you about the key components. The presentation is rather fragmentary, though. Let me first of all drive your attention to the fact that the Industry 4.0, the way the International Alliance Industry 4.0 develops internationally, Not sure if you can see it well on the big screen. I will not enlist the main fields of work. That's where these leading countries have concentrated their intellectual resources. Now the German colleagues are scared of China's hyperactivity in the field. They have quite powerful experts, and a number of states understand that if they will be the first to determine the principles that shall be used by the international community, they will always have a competitive advantage. Today, uniform standards were mentioned on integration, on understanding of the role of computers. Let me underline one more thing. The integration issue is resolved since a long time, for decades. And usually it comes to a desire to create a super system that will integrate all the rest. That's a very rigid mode of the system's coordination. Our Western colleagues understood since a long time that there will be many systems, there will be multiple, including the systems for storage of models of promising products, production systems. There's many of those. These are the so-called administrative capsules or containers within the Industry 4.0 concept. And the main thing is the interoperability and mutual understanding on different levels: legal, organizational, semantic. Technical level is easier, but the semantic level is more difficult, especially the common understanding of terminology, adequacy of understanding of different terminology and different standards. Presented certain documents on this slide. They are promoted in EU and in Germany. Let me also point at certain parts. Here they are: standardization and the creation of the sample architecture of Industry 4.0. These are promising models of big unions and enterprises that will carry out integration of not just the companies, but of the whole branches of industry. The German colleagues determined the objectives of Industry 4.0. That's strategic advantages on the basis of integration and creation of the chains of added value. We have the same task: integration of branches of industry, resuscitation or restoration of the connections that used to exist yet in the Soviet Union. Everything is well presented on this slide, including the problem of personnel.
Я правильно показываю. Ну, давайте вот так. В другой стрелочке. Угу. Слушается.
Sorry, problem switching the slides.
Образование и повышение квалификации. Вы, наверное, знаете, что сейчас учреждены на основе соответствующих постановлений правительства должности в федеральных органах исполнительной власти за место развития.
They now have the position in the governments on deputies of digital development, and that will be so in big government corporations as well. What should be the skills of those experts, and what's the difference from the traditional IT directors? We don't know yet. We're not sure. At present, one of the key issues is to determine these requirements, perhaps in professional standards or in other strategic planning documents. We should create a certain industry for training and refresher courses for future and present-day employees. Russian-German Council was already mentioned here. Let me focus on the following. 3 years passed and we have great results. So we actually created a bridge with the German colleagues to catch up with them from the point of view of IT. We now get better understanding of how they develop, how standards standards get developed. We were assisted by our German colleagues a lot. There's plenty of standards. As for the international standards, some 500 of those already exist. And in Europe and in Germany, there's even more standards. Producers of different equipment in Germany deal a lot with development of standards. Development of standards is a task not only for the technical committees, it's a task for the industry as well. What's the difference of Western models, especially of a German model, which is familiar to us? Standardization goes from the bottom up. It comes from real practice. In Germany, I'm learning the norms for some 40 years or more. The methodologies and standards. Standards shouldn't be invented. Standards is generalization of best practices, step by step, from practice to theory. They are updated every 5 years, ideally. These are the discrete stages when the requirements should get higher and higher. Slide number 9 explains how the international organizations work. The well-known United Committee, GTC1. See what fields they are involved in. Next, 65 Committee. Pay attention to the fact that ISO and International Electrotechnical Committee, IEC, they unite over 100 countries from different branches and technical committees. There's plenty of important things and achievements they have. Now our Coordination Council, formally it was created or founded in November of the year 20. The mission of the committee is on the screen. The committee has chairs of technical committees, 19 of those at the moment. And within the committee, the structure is rather democratic. Each has one vote, etc. Not to lose the understanding of the situation, we also created a consultation expert group headed by Sergei Pogachev. You know him well since the time when he was the deputy head of Eurostandard. He was dealing with technical regulations. These are our technical committees and chairs. So we've created also a consultation expert group so that we can attract experienced experts in the field who really know about introduction of products and system, and they understand about implementation and engineering, re-engineering at enterprises. They know how to change the architecture of the enterprises to get the final effect. These are the names of the committees, believe they'll be useful for you. Several words about association. In the last 3 years, I'm the head of the board of the association, Digital Innovations in Machine Building. It's a small organization, but it's supported on quite a high level. And machine building, if you consider the fact that it's universal, is a key component for key driver of the industry development. The structure of the organization is as follows. In the center, there are our IT companies that are members. At present, we observe a very interesting process of transition from integration to interoperability. To the left, there are the industrial enterprises. The list will get longer with time. I believe some of them shall be sites for pilot projects, for creation of new productions. To the right, you see the universities. We've already explained the importance of training the personnel. Our coordination, our association has the expert
Council, you will see many familiar faces. They are members of Coordination Council and the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs. That's our reinforced structure. We keep fortifying it and we organize the cooperation of intellects. Each expert is the carrier of unique knowledge. Regarding the 4.0, there are many standards, but to understand the main idea of creation of smart productions, it will be the basis for that it's the smart, not digital enterprise, not digital factory, but the smart production is the bar that the bus that integrates the already existing digital enterprises. This has been tested in Germany anyway. I will not describe in detail this model, but this standard shall be adopted as a national standard next year. Next, we started to work on recommendations. It's not a very simple standard. To ease the understanding of this standard, we're developing the methodology guidelines. It's also in the form of a national standard. We've started with the following. We've legalized in Russian the key terms, the glossary of the industry as 4.0, 80 key terms. One should understand the interrelation of these terms. Otherwise, you can't understand the standards provided. We're talking about the creation of the system of national standards, Industry 4.0. That's the semantics and interrelation of these terms. We've spent more than a year to clarify that. Nowadays, we'd like to share that with the industry to explain them how to cleverly use it. Now there's evolution. Now it's developed in Czech language, in German language. The process is joined by countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. It's a global strategy. Now let me point at the fragment related to our ideas about the main fields of standardization and creation of the basis of the system of national standards, Industry 4.0. We've had a dispute, colleagues know of that, and we have come to a certain interim result that may be corrected in future. But there are 9 main fields. That's the way they are determined. Then in each field there will be the decomposition. If I talk about the objects and aspects, there will be 50 or 60, perhaps 70 detailed fields, and the future development of this architecture in the system of standards is impossible in divided and independent mode. The best way is to unite the efforts of the committees and other interested stakeholders so that we work like an international organization on the level of systemic cooperation. That's the fragment of our suggestion to Rosstandart. We have offered 46 standards. That was the first stage. The positive thing is that after the plenary meeting, I met Mr. Anton Shalaev, and he reassured me that Rosstandart shall support us, perhaps not completely, but anyway. He noted an important thing. It's the initiative of not the technical committees only. It's important that the industry participates in the process, like in Germany and other developed countries. Our industry is not mature enough yet, and the IT sector is not quite mature too. Each company tends to say that their produce is the best, hence
will be the first to come. The rest will need to integrate with them. When asked a question on the requirements that come together with their promising solutions and whether that suits the 4.0, complies with the 4.0, the answer is silence. That's it with my presentation. Thank you for the attention.
So you have saved 90 seconds for me, so I will take them. So are you serious? Have I saved something? Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's about interaction and about pillars for interaction. Colleagues,
Коллеги, вот обратили внимание, там такой прямоугольник был нарисован разноцветный и написано словами 4.0.
Multi-color rectangular on the slide. Does anyone have information about the topic? That's the main information. That's the architecture of an enterprise to be. Yeah, that's an architecture of a future enterprise, and everyone knows that life cycle stages are presented differently, but still it's about the same things. About series, operations, use, utilization. So that's the straight line with different lines. Architecture of future industry is something demonstrated on the slide. There's a three-dimensional multi-layer cube. And the current point of the life cycle stage is somewhere inside of this cube.
И это уже принимается.
Это основа архитектуры
индустрии 4.0.
Adopted. That's the foundation for Industry 4.0 architecture. And I think that next year a standard will be issued in Russian, and we will inform you.
Не так все просто.
But everything is quite complicated, even in Germany, but that's where the world is moving to. Yes, Germans have had a rough time, yes, and we are following Industry 4.0 carefully, and we didn't show one slide how countries interact in this field. Industry 4.0 is somewhere in between. It's more popular, but it is surrounded by different countries, 6 directions, and countries don't interact in all the 6 directions, only in 2. First is SMEs, and we won't be talking about the reasons. And the second is standards. All countries interact in terms of the establishment of unified standards. You can't get away from that. And that's parameter which is applicable not only for Germany, but for all the others. And we will allocate this information in a timely manner on our website. And I would like to say that in the run of 3 years, we have managed to have business contact with our German colleagues. They have understood that our intentions are serious, and today and now they share some perspective ideas, and they are looking forward to our help on behalf of our experts within the framework of international standardization organizations and institutions. Yes, colleagues, and before giving the floor to Svetlana, I need to say that we have known each other with the Codex company for a couple of years, but we didn't interact. And after that, we started this interaction together with Svetlana, and every week we have our session, remote sessions. And the only occasion we didn't have it was this week, and just because of the conference held. Of course, there are mistakes made, there are some faults and some painful issues, but they are to be resolved. But what is done in practice is very important, because it's not about talks, but it's about hardware which is used. And Svetlana Dmitrieva is our next speaker, and I'm happy to pass the floor to her. Yes, thank you very much. the topic of my presentation, main principles of the development of smart standards and plans for information provision and support of our activity. And I would like to mention the following. We are practitioners and we have been operating for 30 years. This year we have celebrated our 30th anniversary and we have entered the new decade of our life. And we understand that digitalization and digital documents are a necessity. And our colleagues, our users, they understand that as well, and they become the users of our systems and similar systems. And several years ago, we had to prove to decision makers at certain enterprises that they do need to normalize their funds of documents because they need to transfer those documents into digital format, and that PDF is not enough. And 2021 became a pivotal because no one is asking us why it is needed. People come with other questions from the future, and my presentation is dedicated to the future more. And Boris Pozniev has mentioned that it's better to establish standards based on experience, which is already tested. But now we invent a lot of standards. In spite of having experience, we don't understand that it's quite specific. And we need to take into account experience, which is constituted at international standardization organizations, at European standardization organization, and also to take into account our own experience, field experience, because the drivers of our economy are the companies which have been in the field for long, and they have been dealing with digitalization for long, and they understand the need to shift to the digital format, and of course they start with standards, their own internal standards, the documents they use to manage the process. And another issue emerges, digitalization on the national level. And that is why at the previous session Tupolev has raised the issue of the need to digitalize state standards. There are some norms and problems related to that, and they hinder digitalization of certain processes on an enterprise. And that is why, coming back to the topic of my presentation, I would like to say, to invent first standards, smart standards, we need to use experience of our colleagues, and that's a must. And I would like to draw attention to the fact, to the experience of ISO experience. This year they have issued a report on their work, which lasted 2 years, and it is to a large extent a theoretical one, but it has a very good structure, and it gives certain directions of development and of understanding what smart standards are about. ECN, European Standardization Organization, has finalized its 4-year work, and now it is recruiting practitioners to apply those theoretical developments in practice. And they're ready to invite such practitioners to their team. DIN, German Institute for Standardization. Germans have always been on the front line. They were first to digitalize their funds and transfer them to XML format, and currently there is information about translated sources. A conference has been held this year, the 31st one, and conclusions were made on the application of formats, even such advanced formats as we've seen also need streamlining of specifications which are the part of the standard. So when we form our own understanding in Russia what smart standard is about, there is a need to take into account the experience of those organizations and not to repeat the mistakes they have made.
Да. На следующем слайде,
On the
собственно
next
говоря,
slide,
представлены уровни зрелости стандартизации, или представители
the levels of maturity of
стратегической группы
digital
при ИСО
standardization,
называют это
and they are
классификатором
called
машиночитаемых
classifier
стандартов.
of machine-readable
Я в своем
standards.
докладе больше
And in my
сосредоточусь на
presentation, I
уровнях
will
3 и
focus
4 как
more on
перспективных, к
levels
которым
3
нам
and 4
нужно
as perspective ones,
перейти.
as the
Например,
ones we need to shift to.
немецкий институт стандартизации,
For
как уже
instance,
говорилось сегодня, планирует
plans
перейти к
to
четвертому
shift
уровню
to the
за
fourth level
десятилетие
in the run of a
от
decade.
текущего года.
Starting
Мы сейчас больше
with
говорим
this year,
о переходе со
now we
второго
are
уровня на
talking more
третий и
about
далее. Но
our
при этом
transfer from
хотим
level 2 to level
разработать
3 and
стандарт уже на
further on, but we
смарт-стандарты,
would like to
чтобы быть
devise our
не
smart
просто в
standards,
тренде, но чтобы,
not just to be
возможно, часть
trendy, but
ошибок третьего
to
уровня
avoid part
попытаться
of the
перескочить, что
mistakes
возможно.
of the level 3,
Многие
and that's
наши
possible.
партнеры
A lot of our
начинают вообще
partners
с нулевого уровня по
start with level
цифровизации
0 in
своих
terms of
фондов. То есть
digitalization
с
of their
бумажных
funds,
носителей сразу
start
переходят на второй, а
with
частично и на
paper
третий
funds,
уровень.
and they leap at once to level 2 or to level 3 in some cases.
Еще одна попытка. А можно? Да. Спасибо. Мы в течение этого года много на разных площадках рассказывали о своем понимании, что такое смарт-стандарт. Мы говорили, что смарт-стандарт — это сложная информационная система и даже СУБД. Мы говорили о том, что это контейнер самых разных данных. Но мы основывались на своем опыте. Наша платформа, она является общей, она объединяет все процессы на одном ресурсе, на одной платформе, поэтому проблема передачи данных с одной информационной системы в другую перед нами, она стояла в меньшей степени. Мы только говорили, что смарт-стандарт должен продолжать учитывать требования человекочитаемости, то есть должен быть продолжать нацелен именно на работу человека, но при этом получить чистовое содержание, содержать данные, которые нацелены на информационные системы, на системы промышленности, специализированные системы. Сейчас мы понимаем, что смарт-стандарт в принципе нельзя рассматривать отдельно от информационной системы, в которой он разрабатывается, существует и используется. То есть смарт-стандарт — это информационный объект информационной системы по стандартизации или его применению. И второй аспект, второй принцип смарт-стандарта — это контейнер. Собственно говоря, стандартизация вот этой части, видимо, и нужна в первую очередь. Смарт-стандарт может существовать в рамках информационных систем для стандартизатора, систем для сложных систем для разработчиков стандартов, систем, которые публикуют стандарты и хранят потом эталонные копии этих документов, и потребительских систем. Да? Но они могут находиться там в разных форматах. Главное — обеспечить аутентичность эталонному стандарту. А вероятно, нужно стандартизировать именно контейнер данных, чтобы при передаче из одного этапа на другой смарт-стандарт, его эталонная часть сохранялась, но при этом, чтобы он мог получать дополнительные данные на всех последующих этапах, особенно на этапах потребителя. Почему? Наши потребители, именно драйверы цифровизации промышленности, они уже ушли далеко вперед, даже от системы стандартизации. То есть у нас сейчас наша система стандартизации, она догоняет промышленность в части подходов к цифровизации стандартов.
Verification of data and standardization of data.
Тезисы, и, наверное, я тогда закончу, да, Сергей Анатольевич?
So that's
Наши точки зрения, тезисы пока хаотичные, но они, я надеюсь, очень понятны. В первую очередь мы считаем, что разработка смарт-стандартов должна быть добровольной, и разработка смарт-стандартов, для их разработки должны быть готовы и технические комитеты, и профессиональное сообщество промышленности.
to involve the readiness of technical
Важный аспект.
committees and
Смарт-стандарты
industry
невозможно
representatives. Smart
разработать без
standards can't be
специализированного
elaborated without
инструмента. Значит, для их
specialized set of
разработки
tools.
нужны
So we
специализированные инструменты,
need
которые
specialized
позволят их
tools for their
разработать,
elaboration,
потом
and after
хранить и
that
передавать.
they
И,
need to
естественно,
enable
нужны
to keep and
инструменты
to transfer
использования
them, to store and to
смарт-стандартов.
transfer them and to use them.
Нужна
We
нормативная
need to
база
have
для
norms,
разработки,
normative base
публикации и
for the
применения
elaboration, publication and
смарт-стандартов. И первым
application of
таким
smart
документом,
standards.
с нашей точки
And the
зрения, но
first
таким уже
document
очень
from our
понятным,
point of view, which is
стал
quite
проект
clear,
стандарта на
is the
цифровой
project of a
стандарт,
standard
который был вчера анонсирован
shift to a
на
digital
открытом
standard, which was
заседании
announced
ПТК
at the
711.
open
Вот в
session
нем
of
появились как раз
Project
указания на то,
Technical
что
Committee
стандарт может быть
711. It
контейнером
indicates
и быть
that a standard can
многофайловой
be a
структурой.
container and
Соответственно,
multi-file entity.
к тексту стандарта, понятному нам, читаемому человеком, можно прикладывать различные файлы, которые стандартизированы и необходимы для применения конкретного стандарта. Вчера приводили хороший пример, что к стандарту на связанную с авионикой можно прикладывать таблицы, эталонные таблицы, защищенные таблицы с данными цифровыми, которые сейчас неудобно перебивать руками в управляющие системы. Еще буквально несколько аспектов, и я закончу. Важно, что разработка смарт-стандартов, вероятно, не нужна для всех типов и видов стандартов. Есть стандарты, которые содержат в себе требования в виде достаточно простого изложения, и им достаточно просто машиночитаемый формат. Ну, конечно же, семантическая антология. Поэтому при этом есть такие типы стандартов, где приложение данных к ним просто является неотъемлемой их частью, должно стать. Пятый принцип, с нашей точки зрения, достаточно важный. Техника изложения текста стандарта. Она должна учитывать принципы, изложенные в концепции развития технологий машинно-читаемого права, которая была недавно опубликована. Несмотря на то, что к этой концепции есть некоторые претензии, она основана на, опять же, на западном опыте. Естественно, русский язык отличается от естественного русского языка английского, и его машиночитаемость, она ограничена. Тем не менее, текущая практика изложения текста стандарта слишком сложна для машинного разбора таких текстов. Вот то, о чем выступал представитель АОРАСУ в части разбора текстов. То, что разбор английских текстов дает,
representative of Rosatom automated control systems,
на русском языке 70% качества.
90% of quality for English tests and 70% of quality for Russian tests. I think that I would even decrease this quality from the standpoint of the Russian language. That's why the technique for the standards expression is to be verified and evaluated. Also with the use of natural markers, natural words, which are a natural marker for a requirement, a must, should, etc. And the last point is the choice of architecture and formats for smart standards, which is to be unified, but still needs to be voluntarily, needs to be done voluntarily. And the form of a smart standard inside of the system
на усмотрение потребителя.
Is to be the user's or the consumer's choice. Thank you very much.
Особенно, если вставить «да нет, наверное», да, будет очень хорошо распознаваться. Коллеги, значит, у нас время подходит к концу. Закончилось уже. Естественно, за 15 минут можно будет только чуть-чуть рассказать.
We could cover the topic a bit in the run of 15 minutes, but on the 24th of November we plan to have our IT standard, which will also involve video presentations, and we agreed to do that with colleagues company without time limitations. And as we have run out of time, I think all the questions can be asked either during the session or during the reception. Thank you so much.
Всем спасибо.